Hello dreamers, and welcome to Haunted Sleep. This is the place where eerie tales and calming whispers meet, helping you drift into peaceful sleep with a touch of mystery. Before we begin tonight's story, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Leave a comment below and let me know. And if you're enjoying these nightly journeys, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell, so you never miss a night of chilling calm. Now, close your eyes, get comfortable, and let's drift into the unknown together. My name is Randall. It was the spring or early summer of 1973, and I was 15, living in the coastal town of Pacifica, California. I shared a home with my 3 siblings, my father, and his new girlfriend, a Hawaiian woman who had several children of her own, 3 of whom lived with us. One afternoon, I came home from school, eager to dive into a book I'd borrowed from the library. I wasn't usually much of a reader, but this book had caught my attention in a rare way. I sat at the kitchen table, alone, and quickly lost myself in the story, visualizing each scene as if I were right there. The words on the page faded as the story played vividly in my mind. Then, without warning, I caught sight of something, or rather someone, in my peripheral vision. A young Native American woman appeared in the doorway, dressed in a soft, buckskin outfit fringed with leather tassels. Her dark hair was long and braided, with delicate strips of leather tied at the ends, and she wore turquoise jewelry. Her presence felt entirely real. Oddly enough, I wasn't scared or startled. This wasn't my first strange experience, though my previous encounters had been so brief and elusive that I often questioned if I'd imagined them. Shortly after moving to Pacifica, I'd heard stories about our neighborhood being built over an old Native American burial ground. Some neighbors even claimed to have seen spirits, like the woman across the street who once told us that she found an Indian woman standing by her infant's crib. Back then, I brushed it off as neighborhood lore, fed by people's anxieties about living near a burial ground. But here I was, experiencing something I could not easily dismiss, and I hadn't given any thought to ghosts or spirits that day. I didn't look directly at her right away. I'd learned that when you look too quickly, nothing is ever there. It was as if engaging the senses blocked whatever part of me was allowing me to perceive her presence. I believe it was more my spirit seeing her than my physical eyes. Even with this approach, the vision was brief and elusive, and she was gone within moments. For days I pondered the encounter, questioning why it happened and why I could see her so clearly, right down to the clothes and jewelry. If she were a ghost, why would her clothes and jewelry appear along with her? They were inanimate objects, after all. I came to a conclusion that felt more rational. Perhaps there was a spirit present, trying to get my attention, and she chose the form of an Indian woman to spark my thoughts towards spirits and ghosts. Maybe she knew I was alone and chose that form, aware it would stand out and stay with me. About a week later, something happened that confirmed my suspicions. On the day of a big test, I arrived at school a few minutes late. I was walking briskly across the grounds when the bell rang, urging everyone inside. My classroom was at the far left end of the building, and I was eager to get there, with books under one arm. Suddenly, a ball came rolling out toward me, as if someone had kicked it. I didn't want to waste time chasing it, but I felt sure a yard duty teacher might call out and ask me to pick it up. So I ignored it and kept walking. To my surprise, the ball changed course and rolled directly toward me, forcing me to stop. I shifted my books from my right arm to my left, reached down, and began to put my hands around the ball to pick it up. But as soon as I looked directly at it, it vanished. I straightened up quickly, glancing around to see if anyone had witnessed my awkward attempt to grab thin air. As I continued on to my classroom, a realization hit me. The spirit I'd encountered the week before must have had the ability to project images, and this time it proved its capabilities by presenting only an inanimate object. The ball had looked so real that I tried to pick it up, and that confirmed that both experiences, the Indian woman and the ball, were real, not imagined. This spirit was indeed reaching out, though for what purpose, I still didn't know. It would be years before I'd fully understand why. "Sorry to interrupt," If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. This happened about 16 years ago, back when I still lived in Southern California. I was around 16 or 17, living with my mom and grandma, who I'm very close with. We'd often run errands together in the afternoons, picking up dinner afterward before heading home. One such afternoon, I joined my grandma on a quick trip to the pharmacy. The pharmacy was in a strip mall that we visited regularly since it was also home to our bank, grocery store, and a favorite Chinese restaurant. While my grandma went inside, I stayed in the car, sitting in the passenger seat. It was still daylight, with a typical flow of people and cars in the parking lot. I remember that the spaces next to our car were mostly empty, leaving a couple of spots open beside me. I wasn't paying much attention to anything until, from the corner of my eye, I noticed movement in one of the empty spaces. Turning to look, I froze. Standing there was an unnaturally tall figure, at least 8 feet tall, vaguely human in shape. But its face was far from human. It looked melted, like wax or plastic smeared over a face, with no distinguishable features. There were no eyes, just shallow places where eyes should have been, and it had an oddly high, unnatural hairline. The hair was an unruly mess, like a rust-colored Brillo pad fused onto its head. I don't recall what it was wearing. I was too fixated on that face. This strange figure was waving at me, eagerly, almost frantically, as if it knew me and was thrilled to see me. I was so shocked and scared that I looked away immediately, a sense of dread gripping me. I kept thinking, "What the hell is that?" over and over in my mind. But the horror wasn't over. When I looked away, it suddenly appeared right at my window, almost as if it had teleported there in an instant. It hadn't walked or run, just appeared, leaning down to look at me through the glass. It was so close I could see the disturbing detail of its melted face, and it was still waving, with a twisted sort of excitement. I couldn't bring myself to look at it directly, so I pretended to fiddle with the radio, hoping it would just go away. After a few moments, I glanced over, and it was gone. I looked around the parking lot, even checking the rearview mirror, but saw nothing. If it had been a person, I would have seen it walking away or heading toward one of the stores, but there was nothing. It had vanished. The fear hit me like a punch, and before I knew it, I was crying. When my grandma returned, she noticed how upset I was, and I told her everything as we drove home. She could see how shaken I was. Once we got home, I went straight to my mom, who listened and tried to comfort me. Both she and my grandma believed me, but even I struggled to make sense of it. For a long time, I couldn't tell this story without getting teary-eyed. It was terrifying and unsettling to see something that I knew couldn't be human, yet there it was, looking right at me. Since that day, I refused to wait alone in the car, especially in that strip mall. Even years later, when my mom invited me to a late-night pharmacy trip, I declined. The memory of that figure was too fresh, and the idea of being in that parking lot alone, especially at night, was just too much. There are a few details I should add. I'd been around that shopping center my entire life, and I've never heard of anyone experiencing anything unusual there. It wasn't a creepy place at all, just a regular, busy strip mall. This figure couldn't have been someone in a costume. It was way too tall, and the way it instantly moved from one spot to my window wasn't natural. When it was at the window, I could sense that it was smiling, though I didn't look directly at it. The way it waved was almost clownish, which made it even more disturbing. I wasn't into horror movies or ghost stories back then. I hadn't seen IT or heard of Slender Man. It wasn't misty or ghostly, either, just disturbingly real yet clearly not of this world. I know what I saw, but it still doesn't make any sense. I'm not one to jump to supernatural conclusions, and I have no history of mental health issues, drug use, or anything else that might explain it away. But seeing that thing is a memory that stayed with me, even as unbelievable as it sounds. I was born in England in 1992, and though my parents divorced when I was 3, I had a happy childhood. My mom met my stepdad when I was around 4, and within a year they were married. I'm lucky to have 2 people to call Dad. When I was 5, we moved to Rhode Island for my stepdad's job. It was hard leaving my father and family behind in England, but life in America gradually became my normal, and over the years, the distance created a natural separation between me and my family back home. By the time I was 9, my stepdad's job relocated us to Orange County, California, where I've lived ever since. My parents bought a house in a city called Rancho Santa Margarita. I think it held a record for the longest city name at one point, and we settled into our new life. I grew up on a street called Obispo, living there from ages 9 to 15 until we moved, which meant switching high schools and leaving friends behind. The story begins with those early years on Obispo. It was a typical 90s, upper-middle-class neighborhood with plenty of kids around my age, and I had great fun with them. Still, sometimes I felt like I didn't entirely fit in. Being British made me just a bit different. One friend I used to hang out with, let's call her Sarah, lived further down the street, and we'd play all sorts of silly games, including wars, with berry shooters. I got into trouble once for planting a fart bomb in her garage, something I bought from the ice cream man. Sarah and I ended up going to different middle schools, and over time, we grew apart. When I was 16, long after moving away from Obispo, I ran into Sarah again. We had mutual friends, and occasionally, we'd all hang out. In my first year of college, my parents moved back to Rhode Island for my stepdad's job, leaving me to fend for myself. I wasn't ready. I struggled, eventually flunking out, and moved in with my best friend, sharing great times and both having puppies. Mine was a tiny, energetic pup named Damien. Occasionally, I'd hang out with Sarah and some friends, who sometimes talked about strange events happening at her house on Obispo. One friend claimed her reflection didn't feel like her own when she was there. They also spoke of a dark figure that would crawl between the downstairs guest room and bathroom, and apparently, a friend of theirs had seen it when staying overnight, leaving abruptly in the morning. Sarah would mention trouble sleeping and a few other odd incidents. I found the stories interesting but didn't take them seriously. She and her friends were into the paranormal and fantasy worlds, things like ghosts and vampires, so I thought they were just fueling each other's imaginations. I was a skeptic, though I enjoyed watching ghost shows. I didn't believe in the paranormal, and, having grown up without any religious faith, paid little attention to what she and her friends said. One evening, around age 19 or 20, Sarah invited me over to her house on Obispo. We were alone, just the two of us and my puppy, Damien, no romantic angle. Her parents were out for the night, and her younger brother was off with friends. After a movie, she went to sleep in her parents' room upstairs, while I headed to the bonus room at the opposite end of the house. These rooms were separated by a long hallway that connected the rest of the upstairs rooms. The bonus room was above the garage, and her parents' room overlooked the backyard. The bonus room had 2 large French doors that opened inward. A big leather couch was positioned a little off-center, facing the TV on a large entertainment stand to the right of those doors, which held books and DVDs. Behind the couch, a window overlooked the street leading back to Obispo. I turned on the TV, settled on the couch with Damien snuggled up in a blanket, and flicked through channels, too tired to sleep but too awake to turn the TV off. Then, out of nowhere, there was a loud bang against the French doors. The sound was deafening, like someone was pounding on the doors with all their strength. The doors shook inward with each hit, accompanied by a scraping sound, like a large dog scratching frantically. For a moment, I was frozen with terror. Then, a thought struck me, maybe Sarah was trying to scare me. It was loud enough to be something she could do, so I forced myself up from the couch, leaving Damien shivering in the blanket. The banging and scratching continued as I crept toward the doors, hands reaching for the handles. I was sure I'd catch her in the act. When I yanked both doors open, expecting to see her laughing, there was nothing. Silence. The hallway was empty, cast in shadows from the faint light behind me. Whatever it was had stopped the instant I opened the doors, and there was no trace of anyone being there. A chill went through me as I stood there, my stomach sinking. Slowly, I backed away, glancing down the hall. The silence felt suffocating. I checked every room down the hallway, my heart racing, but found no one. No one could have slipped away in time. I would have caught them. My mind raced with questions, and dread filled the pit of my stomach. Panicked, I ran down the hall to wake Sarah in her parents' room, frantically telling her what had just happened. She was surprisingly calm, barely shocked by my story, and simply told me to let her sleep. Everything was still, and reluctantly I left her to go back to sleep, somehow managing to settle back on the couch with Damien. I half expected something else to happen, but the rest of the night was quiet, and I drifted off, though I could hardly believe I managed to. The next morning, I said my goodbyes and left, shaken but determined to move on. Over the years, I thought about that night often, and sometimes I wondered if I'd somehow imagined it. But years later, when I reached out to Sarah and asked if she remembered that night, she recounted how I'd woken her up, confirming the memory. Hearing her recall that night was both validating and unsettling, bringing it all back with clarity. In case you're wondering, I was sober that night. I've gone over the events repeatedly in my mind, wondering if I missed something rational that would explain it. I wasn't experimenting with anything, no Ouija boards, no horror films that would fuel my imagination. What happened in that house on Obispo remains as vivid as it is inexplicable, and it still crosses my mind every week. I'm 34 years old, married for 12 years to a wonderful man, and we have an 11-year-old daughter whom we adore. Before all of this began, I wouldn't have believed a story like the one I'm about to share. We're not religious, and I would have dismissed it all. But now I'm questioning everything, and I'm trying to explain this without sounding like someone who's lost their grip on reality. We recently bought our dream home in a rural area and were settling in well, until about 3 weeks ago. It started subtly, with fleeting shadows in our bedroom at night. The movements seemed to come from the corner near the walk-in closet. At first, I thought it was just the unfamiliar light patterns in a new home, maybe reflections from cars passing outside. But since then, stranger things have been happening. I noticed that our closet door was always open when I looked at it, even though I was sure I'd closed it. My husband brushed it off, teasing me that I was imagining things, or maybe our daughter was playing tricks. We decided to test it together, closing the door and leaving the room. When we came back, the door was slightly open again. He joked that we must have bought a house on an old burial ground. We laughed, but I couldn't shake a strange unease. Then, more unsettling events started happening at night, especially in our bed. At first, I would wake up feeling the bed shift, attributing it to my husband rolling over. But last week, I woke up again to a rhythmic movement in the bed. I glanced over. He was fast asleep, but his breathing was shallow, almost as if he were in a deep dream. As I was lying back down, the bed shifted again, though my husband was still. He let out a faint moan, the kind you make in a dream when something's troubling you, and then I noticed the sheet moving slightly around his waist. Curious and uneasy, I lifted the sheet slightly and was startled to find him in a state of arousal, his boxers pulled down. I watched as if something was touching him, causing his skin to move and his breathing to deepen. I was terrified and confused, wondering if I was dreaming or going mad. I tried to wake him, saying his name, but he didn't respond. I shook him harder, and finally, he woke up, looking disoriented. Everything stopped the moment he opened his eyes. I told him what I'd seen, and he insisted it was probably a dream. But he confessed that he'd felt something, a tingling, almost electric sensation, as if tiny pins and feathers were brushing him, feeling strangely intense and pleasurable. I was stunned, not knowing what to think. He was still in a bit of a daze, and he admitted that he almost wished I hadn't woken him up. Feeling a surge of jealousy and anger, I left to sleep on the couch. The next morning, I went back to our bedroom to talk to him. I found him asleep, naked, with the sheets, his boxers, and t-shirt thrown to the floor. The bed looked as though it had been used in one of our more energetic moments, and I could smell his lingering scent, leaving no doubt in my mind about what had happened. I stormed out, heading downstairs to make breakfast for our daughter, who noticed my mood. She asked if we were fighting, and I admitted I was a little mad at Daddy. Then she mentioned something that chilled me. She said he had been moaning all night, and wondered if he was sick. I reassured her it was nothing to worry about and tried to distract myself by cleaning. When my husband returned from work, I asked him what had happened after I left the room. He shook his head, saying he couldn't explain it but that he felt waves of tingling, as though his legs were falling asleep. When the feeling reached his hips, the sensation intensified, and he admitted he couldn't resist it. He apologized, telling me it felt as if something was pulling him in, beyond anything he'd experienced. Seeing his genuine fear and guilt, I hugged him and assured him we'd figure it out. That night, we went to bed nervously. Around 2 a.m., I woke to feel the bed moving again, accompanied by a moan from my husband. It was happening again. I held him, telling him it would be okay, but when I looked under the sheets, I saw his boxers were once again pulled down, and his body was reacting as though he was being touched. Desperately, I called out to whatever might be causing this, demanding it to leave him alone. My husband awoke, looked at me in fear, and whispered an apology just as he reached climax. Then, like before, it stopped, and we lay there, shaken, holding each other. Since that night, it has been happening nearly every night, leaving us both exhausted. My husband is racked with guilt, and I'm overwhelmed with jealousy and confusion. He insists that he has no control, that it only happens when he's asleep. I feel like I'm losing him to something I can't fight, and it's tearing me apart. As unbelievable as this all sounds, I don't know how to stop it, and I'm starting to fear for my sanity. The first haunting, childhood in Van Nuys, California. As a child, I lived on Sherman Way in Van Nuys, California. Our house was an old property, nestled on 3.5 acres in the middle of the city, yet it felt like living in the country. We had an orchard, grapevines, chickens, dogs, cats, even horses and goats, and the old farm-style buildings gave the place a unique charm. My parents were involved in show-type business and had built a small western town on the property where they and friends put on shows for local charities, especially for kids with disabilities. The house itself always had a dark, spooky feel. Day or night, I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. Every night, I would hear footsteps, heavy, booted steps walking from the back of the house through the dining room, kitchen, and into the parlor, then across the living room towards the small hallway where the bedrooms and bathroom were. I would hear it walk down the hall to my parents' room, then turn towards my sisters and my room, as if someone were standing in our doorway. Sometimes, I'd hear heavy breathing, though I never dared open my eyes. Then, the steps would retreat, and almost every time, I'd hear a sound like breaking glass, as though a plate glass window shattered somewhere in the house. Initially, we'd jump up to investigate, but after repeatedly finding nothing, we stopped checking. This continued until my mom eventually divorced my father, and we moved to Louisiana. One day, before we moved, my mom mentioned the strange sounds to a neighbor, a very old woman who said a worker had been killed on our property long ago. We figured it must have been him, checking in on us. Sometimes, playing in the sheds or orchard, I'd feel like I was being watched. And once, a family friend staying over on our couch yelled out in the night, "Hey, get off my feet!" I said, "Get off!" We ran in, and he told us he thought one of us kids was sitting on his feet, but there was no one around. He left in the middle of the night, and never stayed over again. There were times I'd hear someone calling my name, like a distant echo of my mother's voice. I'd run to find her, only for her to say she hadn't called me, though sometimes she'd add that she was just about to call me. I was sure I heard her voice, even if she was nowhere near me. That house held something I can't explain, even today. The second haunting, living off base in Groton, Connecticut. Years later, my husband was stationed in Groton, Connecticut, where we lived in a small house next to a big Victorian. Our landlady lived in the Victorian house, and nearby fields still bore traces of Civil War battles, with trenches and markers commemorating fallen soldiers. One night, after crossing the battlefield to take a shortcut home from a friend's house, I was lying in bed with my husband and our little dog by the bed. I was drifting off when I suddenly woke to tears rolling down my face, as though I'd been crying without realizing it. Then there was a loud bang, like a gunshot, followed by a flash of light right in our room. Our dog jumped onto the bed in terror, and I ran to the window to check for cars, thinking it might have been a backfire, but the street was empty. From that night, strange things began happening, mainly to me. In the mornings, after my husband left for the base, I'd go back to sleep, only to wake up feeling paralyzed, fighting to open my eyes or move. I knew that if I surrendered and fell back asleep, I wouldn't wake up. It happened daily, but only when my husband was gone. One day, while packing, I felt suddenly exhausted and set my book on the fridge before lying down. As I drifted off, I felt the same paralyzing pull, but this time, I managed to open my eyes just enough to see a swirling circle on the wall across from the bed. I felt as though it were trying to pull me in, and I fought to move. Suddenly, a loud slam jolted me awake. I ran to the kitchen, where I found my book on the other side of the room, as though it had been thrown. I felt as though someone had just saved me. When my husband returned, I told him what happened, and we decided to leave that night instead of waiting till morning. The third haunting, apartment by the cemetery. For a while, my husband and I split up, and I moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment across from a cemetery. Soon after moving in, I started experiencing strange activity in my home office. Every evening, as I sat at my computer, the lights in that room would start flashing, and the door would slowly close. I thought it was just faulty wiring or a draft, so I had the landlord check the lights, but nothing was wrong. One night, as the lights flickered and the door creaked shut again, I got up and said, "Okay, if someone's here, stop it." I didn't feel scared, but it continued every night, and in my mind, I pictured a man in a black suit. One evening my grandson, who was almost 2, was with me. The lights flickered, and the door began to close, and he started pointing, terrified, saying, "Man!" He was so scared he tried climbing over my shoulder to get away. I felt a sudden surge of anger and shouted, "I don't know who you are, but you're scaring my grandson. Go away!" My grandson relaxed, looked back towards the room, and said, "Man gone." He was fine for the rest of the evening. The following night, alone in the room, the lights flickered, and the door started to close. I went to the living room and said, "Listen, I don't know who you are, but don't ever scare my grandson again. If you need help crossing over or have something to say, let's hear it. Otherwise, leave and don't come back." It stopped, and the remaining months I lived there were peaceful. Final experience: field trip to the police department. Since then, my experiences have been few, though I recently had an unsettling moment at work. I teach in an early childhood program, and we took a class field trip to the local police department. As we stood by the 2 cells used for temporary holding, I felt dizzy and short of breath, like an oppressive weight had settled on me. I felt so nauseous that I told the other teacher I needed to step outside. The police officer leading the tour casually mentioned that they'd stopped using the cells for holding after a detainee had hanged himself in one of them a few years ago. I pointed to the cell on the right and said, "That one?" He confirmed it, and I could barely keep it together as we headed outside. Once we were out in the open air, the nausea left, and I could finally breathe again. Each of these experiences has left a mark on me, moments that, no matter how much time passes, I won't forget. My good friend Gloria takes care of her 93-year-old mother, Carmen, who suffers from Alzheimer's and dementia. I've met Carmen and witnessed some of her episodes, and they seem to be getting worse over time. Lately, Carmen's health has declined even more, mainly because she often refuses to eat or spits out her medication. The only way Gloria manages to get her to eat is by warning that she'll have to go to a nursing home otherwise. Carmen's temper and behavior have been challenging, especially given the complicated history between her and Gloria. Gloria is the middle of 7 children and had a difficult childhood, largely due to her mother's resentment toward her. Carmen often singled her out for all the cleaning and would frequently berate her, even telling her she regretted having her. At 15, Carmen kicked Gloria out of the house one night, declaring she was dead to her. They rarely stayed in touch after that, but 4 years ago, Gloria got a call that Carmen had fallen and needed hip surgery. The doctors told her siblings that Carmen couldn't live alone anymore and needed full-time care. The siblings declined, each citing lack of time or space. Desperate, Carmen turned to Gloria, pleading with her to take her in. Gloria found herself unable to say no, hoping they might finally heal old wounds and make amends. Unfortunately, her mother's attitude hasn't changed, and Carmen only treats her kindly when she needs something. A year after moving in with Gloria, Carmen was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, which only intensified her outbursts and abusive remarks. Recently, Carmen's behavior has taken a strange turn. She often storms into Gloria's room late at night, upset and insistent that there are people in her room who keep her awake. She accuses Gloria of hiding these visitors, and says they are making too much noise. Carmen even describes a little girl in a blue dress who stands beside her bed, giggling and watching her. Whenever Carmen tries to approach her, the girl runs and hides, laughing all the while. Carmen also insists there's a man in her room, a man she believes Gloria hired to kill her. She claims he whispers threats, saying he wants her dead. Gloria has spoken to Carmen's doctors about these disturbing visions, and they assure her it's part of the dementia. Still, Carmen's vivid descriptions are unsettling. Gloria and I talk on the phone a couple of times a week, and I'd heard about Carmen's visitors, though never in much detail. Carmen still remembers who I am and often asks Gloria to invite me over for lunch. One day, a few weeks ago, I had some time after work and accepted an invitation for dinner. I was sitting in the living room with Carmen while Gloria prepared dinner in the kitchen. Carmen's bedroom door was half open, directly across from where I sat. I turned at the sound of a noise in her room and, for a split second, I saw something dart across the room. It was fast, and I couldn't make out any details, but I was certain whatever it was had blue clothing. Startled, I put my hand to my chest, but Carmen hadn't noticed, and Gloria hadn't seemed to notice anything either. I decided to keep quiet, not wanting to upset Carmen or make her feel more unsettled than she already was. Later, as we sat around the dining table for dinner, I kept hearing soft noises and mumbling coming from Carmen's room. I asked if we'd left the television on somewhere, but Gloria assured me we hadn't. When I got up to leave, I distinctly heard giggling, clear and unmistakable. I glanced at Gloria, but she didn't seem to have noticed anything, so I didn't mention it. I simply said my goodbyes and let myself out. A few days later, I was talking with Gloria on the phone, and she brought up Carmen's stories about the little girl in her bedroom. Curious, I asked if Carmen's description of the girl matched anyone she had known in life. Gloria said no, but explained that her mother often talks about how the girl giggles, hides, and runs around her bedroom. Hearing it recounted that way gave me goosebumps. Gloria believes Carmen is either imagining things due to her dementia or just looking for reasons to accuse Gloria of things in the morning, like having parties that keep her awake. But after what I saw and heard during my visit, I wonder if Carmen could be seeing something real, something beyond what her condition might explain. The fact that Gloria didn't seem to notice any of it while I was right beside her makes me question my own perception. Why didn't Gloria hear the giggling when I did? Am I imagining things myself, or could there be more to Carmen's visitors than either of us can explain? This whole situation has left me with more questions than answers, and I can't help but feel unsettled by the possibility that Carmen is, in fact, seeing something, or someone, real. My name is Larry Cedino, and I live in South San Francisco, California, just a few miles from Colma, famously known as the City of Souls. It's the smallest city in San Mateo County, with around 1,509 residents and over 1.5 million souls resting in 16 cemeteries, including a pet cemetery. 10 years ago, my family and I moved into our current home. My children, wife, and even our dogs have each experienced something strange in this house. It all began subtly, with creaks and noises that were dismissed as the house settling. But soon, doors would open and close on their own, voices would echo from empty rooms, and shadows would streak across the rooms or down the stairs. We have a motion sensor switch for the bathroom light on the second floor, located near the bedrooms, with a staircase leading down to the main living room. Many times, while sitting on the couch, I'd hear footsteps on the stairs. One time, as I sat with our 2 dogs, the bathroom light suddenly clicked on, footsteps creaked on the stairs, and my dogs' heads followed an invisible presence as it moved slowly across the room. Their gaze never wavered, tracking something I couldn't see. Startled, I grabbed my keys and left the house for a while. One night, I was watching TV in the family room while my youngest daughter, Savannah, ran around with a toy laser pointer. I asked her to stop, and a few moments later, I noticed a soft glow coming from the dining room. Thinking she hadn't listened, I leaned forward to call out to her. But instead of Savannah, I saw an orb, a glowing globe slowly floating down the hallway. Inside the orb, I could make out the image of a man from the neck up. I leaned back, stunned. This orb glowed with a blue, sky-like light, hovering about 8 feet off the ground. The man inside had Roman-style hair and beard, both white, with a golden tassel draped around part of his collar. It seemed unaware of me until it entered the family room. Then it paused and turned to look at me directly. Strangely, I didn't feel afraid. I just stared at it, locked in a silent gaze. The room's fluorescent ceiling lights suddenly flicked on, filling the room with brightness. I looked toward the light switch, half expecting to see someone there, but the room was empty. When I turned back, the orb was gone, and the motion-activated floodlights outside had turned on, as if something had passed through the glass doors into the backyard. Stunned, I ran upstairs to my bedroom and sat on the bed, trying to process what had just happened. In the days that followed, I reflected on the encounter, convinced that the orb had somehow created a diversion to exit through the backyard doors, tripping the motion lights on its way out. There's one more part to this story that seems important. When we first saw the house, it hadn't even been listed on the market yet. We'd been looking at a nearby property when our realtor got a call about a new listing right around the corner. When we arrived, it became clear that this was no ordinary home. Deadbolt locks were on every door, even the front door, and you needed a key to get in and out of most rooms. The previous owners, a married couple going through a bitter divorce, had essentially divided the house in two, with the wife living upstairs in the room facing the driveway and the husband in the back of the house. A wall and an extra kitchen had been added to split the house into 2 living spaces with separate entrances. After we moved in, we knocked down the dividing wall and restored the house to its original layout. Today, my wife and I find ourselves in a similar arrangement. We're separated, living under the same roof but in different parts of the house, she in the room facing the driveway, and I in the back, just as the previous owners had done. Coincidence? Perhaps. But sometimes I wonder if the history of this house has left an imprint, a lingering energy that affects those who live here. Christmas of 1993, I went to stay with my best friend at the time, Terry. She and her parents were staying in an old house down the highway in Nevada City, California. The place had been left exactly as it was by the previous tenants. Every room still held their belongings, and even the unplugged fridge still had food in it. Who knows how long it had been left that way. Terry's parents were involved with the Hells Angels and rarely came home, leaving us to our own devices. At 16, it felt like a dream setup. We could come and go as we pleased, though we were often broke and hungry, living off ramen noodles and our independence, or so we told ourselves. One day, I got curious about what had happened to the previous tenants and asked Terry if she knew. She explained that a family had lived there before, but a violent fight had broken out between the man of the house and another guy. The fight moved onto the porch, where the man was shot and killed. I was skeptical, but she took me out to the porch, pointing to a chunk missing from the wooden swing gate. She said that was where the bullet had exited the man's body. Sure enough, there was a jagged chunk missing. It sent a chill down my spine, explaining both why the house was still full of belongings and how her parents had managed to secure the place. Then Terry added to the tale, saying people claimed to hear the man's heavy boots walking the porch. A few had even seen him. Knowing the backstory, I felt uneasy staying there. We did our best to avoid the place, only sleeping there twice, showering once, and eating ramen one lonely night. Still, it was Christmas, and with boxes of decorations left behind in the living room, we decided to try to bring a little festivity to the space by putting up a few decorations ourselves. After we were done, we slumped down on the couch, chatting about the ghost and wondering if we'd get to hear his fabled boots on the porch. That's when the living room light started to dim, softly at first, then more and more until the room was dark. Terry and I froze, listening. The house was silent, and then we heard it, the sound of boots pacing on the porch. The steps moved down the porch, then paused. Terry bolted up and flipped on the light switch. We both agreed that was enough for one night, and quickly retreated to the bedroom. As we lay there, still wound up from hearing the boot steps, we heard scratching sounds above us in the attic. Trying to calm ourselves, we chalked it up to mice, though whatever was up there sounded far too large to be mice. The next day, we decided it was best to leave the house for a while. Before we left, I thought I'd grab a quick shower and make something to eat. But that turned out to be a mistake. The entire time I was in the shower, I felt as if someone were watching me, a deep, unsettling sense of danger creeping over me. I took the fastest shower of my life and went to the kitchen to make ramen. The kitchen counters were covered with random dishes, and beside the stove was a round table also stacked with dishes. As I was cooking, I heard a faint ping sound, like a water droplet hitting a dish. I glanced around, but couldn't find the source. Returning to the stove, I heard it again, louder this time, followed by more and more pings, until it was a near constant noise. Looking over, I saw something that froze me in place. Maggots seemed to be falling from the ceiling into the stack of dishes. There was no hole, no visible source from above, yet they kept dropping, one after another. I panicked, running out to the living room to grab Terry. But when we returned to the kitchen, the maggots had vanished, the dishes completely clean. We left the ramen right where it was and vacated the house for a couple of days. Soon afterward I went back home, and Terry and her family moved to a new place. I've never been able to explain the events in that house, but I won't ever forget the feeling that something was wrong there, something beyond what either of us could rationalize. I was 16 when this happened, living with my aunt. My first encounter with the little girl occurred in broad daylight. My aunt and I were standing by the picture window, overlooking the vacant lot next to the house, chatting as we often did, when I noticed a young girl standing at the edge of the lot. She looked around 10 years old, just standing there and staring at us. In any other situation, I might have thought nothing of it. My aunt's neighborhood was well populated. But this girl was different. She wore a tattered nightgown, her hair was matted, and her face was dirty, like she hadn't bathed in a long time. I quickly nudged my aunt, asking if she could see the girl too. My aunt just stood there, mouth agape, then muttered, "Poor kid, I wonder if she's lost. I don't recognize her from around here." She moved to call the police, thinking the child might need help. But as she picked up the phone, I watched the girl smile slightly, then turn and run into the vacant lot, vanishing into thin air. I stood there in disbelief, scanning the lot for any sign of her, but she was gone. When my aunt returned to the window, she seemed almost blank, acting as if nothing unusual had happened. When I asked her if she had seen the girl vanish, she simply replied, "What girl?" A few days later, I found myself looking out that same window, thinking about the girl, and there she was again. This time, she stood just on the other side of the fence, smiling at me. Her smile was unsettling, and after what felt like an eternity of us staring at each other, I decided to go outside and confront her. I made my way into the lot, but as I approached, she giggled and darted off, disappearing behind a small cluster of bushes. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I followed her. But when I reached the bushes, she was gone. All I found was a small, clear area in the middle of the brush. Something compelled me to pick up a stick and start digging in the soil. After a few minutes of digging, the stick hit something solid. I pulled it out, a piece of fabric. The realization hit me instantly. It looked just like the nightgown the girl had been wearing. A chill ran through me, and I dropped the stick and fabric, running back to the house. I was convinced the girl was trying to tell me something. I probably should have gone to the authorities with what I found, but at that point in my life, I didn't know how to handle something like this, so I decided to let it go. That, it turns out, was a mistake. The following nights were anything but peaceful. My bedroom was adjacent to where I'd found the fabric, just on the other side of the fence. One night, as I sat in my room with a candle lit, listening to music, I heard soft giggling. Turning the music down, I listened closely. It was the same giggle I'd heard when she ran off. It sounded as if it were right there in the room with me. I looked around the room, and my gaze finally settled on the window. There she was, floating outside, staring in at me with that same unsettling smile, giggling softly. The window was a good distance from the ground, so she had to have been floating to be looking directly at me. For a while, we simply stared at each other, and finally, I pushed a large armoire in front of the window, hoping to block her out. I sat back down, turning the music up in an attempt to drown out her laughter. But the giggling grew louder, seeming to echo from every corner of the room, filling the space. I tried to ignore it, but the louder it got, the harder it became. Then, the scratching started, a frantic tapping and scratching on the window behind the armoire. I'd had enough. Deciding that sleep might be my only escape, I lay down, hoping she'd eventually go away. Exhausted, I finally drifted off to sleep, the relentless giggling following me into my dreams. When I woke the next morning, I felt sore, as if I'd been through a rough night. Checking my abdomen, I noticed a long, deep scratch, about the size of a small fingernail. I knew then that I was dealing with something far more sinister than I'd realized, and that she meant me harm. For the rest of my stay at my aunt's, I slept in the living room, and the occurrences stopped. I moved out soon afterward and didn't look back. To this day, I still think about that little girl and wonder if she was ever laid to rest. For the last few nights, I'd been hearing strange noises in my bedroom, like someone walking around while I'm asleep. I'd wake up to a rustling sound, as though someone was crumpling paper or moving a plastic bag. I initially thought it might be a mouse, even though my cat sleeps at the foot of my bed. Normally, any noise would make him alert, with his ears pricked, and he'd always look down at the floor. But lately, when I hear the noises and turn on the light, my cat doesn't look down, he looks up, as though seeing something above. Strangely, he doesn't seem afraid, which is unusual for him. In the past, whenever there were sounds, he'd avoid the bedroom entirely, running to my son's room and refusing to come back in. This morning, as part of my usual routine, I called for my son, whose room is across from mine, to get ready for school. He normally calls out, "Coming!" and then gets up, walks with me downstairs, opens the gate, and waits while I pull out of the driveway before he heads back inside. Today, though, he didn't answer. I called him a second time, louder this time, still nothing. I even wondered if he'd somehow snuck out, though he's never done that before. I called a third time, almost shouting. Just as I was about to turn the door handle to check on him, the door opened, and there he was, wide awake. He casually said, "Let me put my shoes on," and turned back to grab them. I was surprised, thinking he'd been ignoring me, so I asked why he didn't respond. "I don't know." He shrugged, clearly awake. As we walked downstairs, I continued to press him about it, asking why he hadn't answered sooner. Just before I drove off, he shared something unsettling. "Mom, I did hear you calling earlier. I woke up and responded, but when I went into the hallway, you weren't there. I thought you might still be in your room, but then I noticed your light was off. So I went back to my room, checked the time, it was only 3:09 a.m., and figured I'd just been dreaming. I lay back down, and then I heard you call again. I said coming, and went out to the hallway, but again you weren't there. I even went to your room, but you were sound asleep. It was really weird. I thought maybe you'd been calling me in your sleep," he continued, explaining that after returning to his room, he'd started to drift off when he heard me walk to the bathroom. A few minutes later, he heard me call him again, but still, he didn't see me when he looked out. He went back to bed, uneasy, staying awake until I finally called him for real this morning. By the time he got to my door, he had planned to come in and tell me about it. Now I'm left wondering what's going on. Why is something mimicking my voice to call my son? And why isn't my cat reacting like he usually does? He's always avoided any area with noises or unusual activity, usually running to my son's room and hiding there. Now he seems completely unbothered. Thinking back, this isn't the first time strange things have happened in this house. It used to belong to my parents, and when I was a teenager, I experienced a lot of unexplained activity in my old bedroom, the room that is now my son's. Almost every night, I'd feel my bed shake, books would fly off the shelf, and I'd hear whispering right beside my ear. It went on so long that it became almost normal, though I never told my parents. My mom got scared whenever I shared things like this, and the rest of my family would either laugh or dismiss it. When I moved out, that room stayed empty for years until my parents eventually moved out, and I moved back in as an adult. I was still uneasy going into that room at night. I had an intense experience in there, a story for another time, that made me have the room blessed by Catholic priests several times. I even brought in a medium, who claimed to put a barrier around the room to keep anything from coming in. Now I'm wondering if something has been trying to enter the bedroom again. I'll cleanse the house as I usually do, using sage. This seems to keep things calm for a while, though activity always picks up again. I've gotten somewhat used to it over the years, but it bothers me deeply when it starts affecting my children. My daughter, who has been living with family in Nevada for the last 7 months, was experiencing night terrors and sleep paralysis before she left, but they stopped completely once she moved out. She's coming back for the summer in 2 weeks, and I don't want her returning to a house filled with this kind of activity. I'm still unsure if these disturbances come from different entities passing through or if it's the same presence returning time and time again. Whatever the case, I'm hoping to find some peace soon, especially for the sake of my kids. We bought our house at the end of March, and since then, a few odd things have been happening. Just a couple of days after we moved in, I woke up to find my kids' bedroom windows open, even though we had shut them the night before. The screens were still in place, and the back gate leading to the windows was latched. It was strange, but I brushed it off at first. Then my middle son, who's 14, started hearing noises in the hallway at night. He told me he heard a little girl counting. She'd count up to 8 and then stop, and he'd also hear the sound of someone walking down the hall. One day, I went to use the bathroom in my bedroom. It's a pocket door, so it slides, and to my knowledge, I was alone. My husband had left early for work, my oldest was at a friend's, and I'd just gotten back from dropping the other 2 kids at school. As I approached the bathroom door, I noticed it was shut with the light on inside. I tried to slide it open, but it was locked. My first thought was that my oldest son had come home unexpectedly and might have hurt himself. I knocked and called his name, no response. Panicked, I grabbed a flat object to turn the lock. But when I opened the door, the bathroom was empty. That experience rattled me, especially because I know I didn't lock the door on my way out that morning. Another time, I woke up at 4:45 a.m. to get ready for work. My youngest son's room is directly across from mine, and as I glanced down the hall, I saw a black, foggy mass moving slowly in front of his toy drawers. It was about 3 feet tall, without any defined shape, and it moved so slowly that I had time to watch it drift across his room. I stood there, watching as it faded into the wall. Since then, I've kept an eye out but haven't seen it again. Then there was the incident with the pen, which I still can't wrap my head around. I was lying on my bed paying bills. I had my phone, bills, and a pen with me. Realizing I needed the checkbook, I left everything except my phone on the bed and crossed the room to the file cabinet. I was almost there when the pen I'd left on the bed hit me in the back of the head. I turned to find it lying at my feet, a good 12 or 13 feet from where it had been. "Did you just hit me with a pen? That's not cool," I said out loud, baffled. It didn't hurt, but it was a solid enough hit to make me question how it had gotten there. I can't explain it, and thinking about it still boggles my mind. The next strange occurrence might have involved a real person, but I'm not sure. I was making coffee around 5 a.m., with only the light under the microwave on because the main kitchen light is too bright for early mornings. While shaking my creamer bottle, I looked out the kitchen window and saw a man standing in the driveway, staring at me. He looked young, small, like a 12-year-old, and was dressed in black. We stared at each other for a few seconds, neither of us moving. Realizing he was just standing there, I ran for the door, creamer still in hand, but by the time I got outside, he was gone. There was no sound of footsteps or running. I told my husband about it, and we decided to get a Ring doorbell for added security. It might have been a real person, but something about his size and the way he looked just didn't sit right with me. I still can't shake the eerie feeling. The last event happened to my son. This morning, he told me that he was lying in bed last night when his closet door, which had been open about 2 feet, slid shut on its own. This wasn't the first time he'd seen it slide open and then close by itself on a previous night. I checked the doors, and they don't move easily. It takes a bit of pressure to get them to slide, so I don't think it was gravity or a draft. We've only been in this house for about a month and a half, and I'm starting to wonder what's going on. In our last house, we sometimes heard a little girl's disembodied voice saying, "Hello," or "Mom," so I wonder if she somehow followed us. My feeling so far isn't one of fear. I don't feel threatened, but I'm curious about who or what might be here with us. A few years ago, my oldest daughter was preparing for her first communion, which required a 2-day retreat for parents and godparents. During this retreat, my children's father experienced a profound spiritual reconnection. I remember seeing him literally brought to his knees in tears. From that moment, he started attending Mass every Sunday with my mom and the kids, signed up for Bible study, and even bought his own Bible. He proposed to me, wanting a big Catholic wedding, and suddenly, he wanted everything blessed by God. But just as we were stepping closer to faith, unsettling things began happening. Doors would slam on their own, and we constantly felt like we were being watched. The house was always freezing, day and night, no matter what we did. At night, we'd hear whispers in our bedroom, though we could never find where they were coming from. Our children started having nightmares, and their personalities began to change. They weren't as joyful, and a heavy tension seemed to blanket the whole house. My ex complained of difficulty sleeping, saying something kept waking him. A few times, I woke to find him peering out the bedroom window, muttering that he is here to take the children. When I'd asked who, he'd shush me, saying, "He'll hear us." The next morning, he'd laugh it off, saying he must have been sleepwalking. One of the church members advised us to leave a Bible open on our nightstand, turn to a specific psalm. We started praying each night before bed. For a short while, it seemed to help. A group from our church came over one evening to help us bless the house. We prayed together, sang hymns, and felt a peace we hadn't felt in months. But as soon as everyone left, and we went upstairs, we found the Bible lying on the floor, as if it had been thrown across the room. That scared me enough to spend the night with my children in their room instead. The next day, we had a priest come to bless the house. For a while, things seemed calm, and we thought we'd regained control. But as we began planning our Catholic wedding, the fighting started, and didn't stop. We argued over everything, even on our way to the church and throughout our honeymoon. It felt like we suddenly hated each other. We sought counseling with our priest and from a few church members, but nothing helped. Looking back, I remember feeling an inexplicable sense of anger and resentment toward him, as if something had settled between us, poisoning every interaction. It began affecting our children, who eventually needed counseling too. They'd come to our room at night, complaining of a knocking that kept them awake, and they clung to us in fear. My oldest started sleeping with her rosary, praying herself to sleep. One morning, she came to me, asking if I'd taken her rosary. We searched everywhere, but it was gone. No matter what we tried to cleanse the house or our relationship, nothing worked. We went through the motions of a happy family for appearances, attending Mass every Sunday, but we could hardly stand to look at each other. After enduring 3 years of this strange, heavy misery, we reached a breaking point. Without any of the usual anger or arguments, we both decided we'd had enough. After 12 happy years and 3 painful ones, he packed his things and left. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Our home felt lighter, as if a weight had lifted. My children and I slept through the night. No noises, no knocking, no blankets being tugged. Interestingly, he felt the same way. He told me he finally felt at peace, free from the anger that had clouded his days. It's as though, once we parted, the oppressive energy that had surrounded us simply vanished. I still experience occasional unexplained occurrences, and I've seen spirits for as long as I can remember. But nothing compares to what we endured during those years. I'll always wonder what was truly happening. It felt as if something didn't want us drawing closer to God. Since then, my children have all been baptized, received their first communions, and been confirmed, as is tradition in our devout Catholic family. Though I believe in God, I'm not a religious person anymore, and I don't attend Massachusetts. My children are older now, and I've left the choice up to them. Looking back, I still can't fully understand what happened during those dark years. But I know that whatever it was, we all felt it, and it didn't want us finding peace and faith. In January, while on tour, I visited New York for the first time. As a musician, I've traveled a lot, but New York was different. It felt both unfamiliar and deeply significant. On my 3rd night in the city, I had a dream about someone well known in entertainment who had passed away a long time ago. Oddly, they weren't a musician, nor someone I usually thought about. The dream. I was standing alone in Times Square in the middle of a snowy night. The city was empty and eerily silent, and I began to wonder if I might be the last person left on Earth. Just then, from the shadows they emerged. They walked up to me, smiled warmly, and said, "Hi, I've been waiting for you." We started walking side by side, through the empty streets together. I woke up feeling a bit unsettled. I'd never dreamt of them before and hadn't given them any recent thought. It felt strange, but I brushed it off as just a dream and went on with my day. Later, I visited Central Park and wandered around until I was tired. I found myself on the steps of an old brownstone building, scrolling on my phone for a nearby coffee shop. Out of nowhere, their names suddenly flashed in my mind, as if it had been lit up like a sign. Curious, I dropped my search for coffee and Googled their name. That's when I learned something I didn't know: they had lived in New York. I had always thought they were based in Los Angeles due to their entertainment career. I read further and found the address of their old New York apartment. On impulse, I typed the address into Google Maps to see how close it was. And there I was, sitting on the steps of their old apartment. Of all the places in New York, I had ended up there, right where they had once lived. My jaw dropped. The dream and this uncanny synchronicity felt too surreal to be a coincidence. I felt a deep sense that something more was going on, something I needed to understand. When I returned to where I was staying, I felt compelled to reach out to the owner of the building, asking if I could tour the apartment. They graciously agreed, and 2 days later, I found myself standing in the space where this person had once lived. After returning to Los Angeles, things began to happen. Electronics would turn on by themselves, and I felt an unexplainable warmth and a loving energy surrounding me. Sometimes, I'd wake up to feel a gentle touch on my hair, yet there'd be no one there. Every photo I took had a small orb, and I began having more dreams about them, vivid and emotional. I decided to see a medium, who confirmed what I'd been feeling. She told me I needed to return to New York, both because of this spiritual connection and for my music career. She said that going back would reveal things to me, and my life would change in ways I couldn't yet imagine. Taking her advice, I returned to New York 5 weeks later. During that time, I had become friends online with the apartment's current owner, who offered to let me stay there while I looked for my own place. The experience of staying in their old apartment was nothing short of extraordinary. Waking up there each morning felt like a destined encounter. It became clear that this was meant to happen. I would sometimes wake up with a vivid memory of them sitting beside me, talking to me, our energies merging in ways that felt profound and deeply emotional. It was as if they were trying to communicate, to show me something, or to connect with me on a spiritual level. In my dreams, they were so real, with feelings and emotions that seemed boundless. One of the strangest things was a little drum in the apartment that would sound as if someone were tapping it, even though no one was near it. The owner told me it had never done that before I came to stay. Every day, I could feel their energy clearly, sometimes picking up on their mood, their presence, as though they were right there. I've become close to this spirit in a way that's difficult to describe, and my connection to them feels genuine and mutual. A friend believes this may be a soul connection from a past life, or that this spirit wants to guide me along my creative path. I don't dwell on their fame or notoriety. For me, this is a spiritual experience beyond anything rooted in status. From the start, what I've felt is a genuine connection on a soul level. I didn't seek out this person or their history, it came to me. The synchronicities, the dreams, and the signs have all been a reminder of something beyond this world. This experience has not only been surreal and beautiful, but it has also awakened abilities in me I never fully realized I had. It's changed the way I view the spirit world, and I feel like I'm on a journey I was always meant to take. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I was only about 3 or 4 months old when this happened. My parents were outside in the carport, smoking, while I was asleep in their bedroom crib. They used a baby monitor to keep track of me, and my dad told me that it was completely silent, until both he and my mom suddenly heard a voice over the monitor speaking in a strange, almost demonic language. Panicked, my dad rushed inside, ready to confront whatever intruder was in the room. When he reached my crib, he saw no one, but heard muffled cries coming from me. I was suffocating. I had been wearing a beanie to keep warm in the cold room, and somehow, it had been pulled down tightly over my nose and mouth. My tiny hands, wrapped in mittens, couldn't have pulled it down so forcefully, and at that age, I didn't have the strength to remove it. My dad says he had to wrench the beanie off, and I started breathing erratically, gasping for air after nearly suffocating for an unknown amount of time. Number 2. A few years later, when I was around 3.5 or 4, I started talking and playing with an unseen person in the house. At first, my parents thought it was an imaginary friend, until one day when my grandma, dad, and mom actually saw her while we were playing peekaboo. She was a young girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with curly blonde hair and a long yellow dress embroidered with tiny red roses. I remember her being sweet, but she would get upset if I played with my younger brother instead of her. When I was nearly 5, my mom, my brother, and I moved away to Kansas after my dad was arrested for domestic violence. We stayed in Kansas and Missouri for several years before I finally moved back to live with my dad, grandma, and brother. My mom stayed in Kansas, working to rebuild her life. During those first months back, I almost forgot about the little ghost girl. But one night, her name, Sarah, popped back into my head, and all the memories came flooding back. I started to see her again, but this time she wouldn't talk or play with me. I sensed that she was angry, hurt that I'd left her alone all those years. I spent hours talking to the air, trying to explain, hoping she would understand, but I never got a response. Eventually, Sarah started appearing to other people in the house. One night, my dad yelled from the living room for my younger stepsister to get back to bed. I glanced over and saw my sister fast asleep on the couch, exactly where she had been for hours. Curious, I went to find my dad, who was staring, pale-faced, into the empty laundry room. He whispered, "I saw her. When I looked confused, he explained that he had seen a little blonde girl run from the bathroom to the laundry room, thinking it was my sister. But when he got up to scold her, he found the laundry room empty. He remembered I'd had an imaginary friend who looked just like the girl he'd seen. We didn't talk about the incident again for a long time. Number 3. By the time I was 10, a new spirit seemed to have taken up residence in my bedroom, disturbing me and messing with my belongings. I had a ceiling fan that I could never get to turn on, and a light fixture with glass casings around each bulb. My dad was abusive, so I spent a lot of time locked in my room, eating cereal straight out of the box. Whenever I left, even for a minute, I'd always turn off the light and shut the door. One day, I left to grab more cereal and noticed a light shining from under the door on my way back. Confused, I opened the door to find my fan on at full speed, shaking the light fixture so hard that one of the glass casings had broken and lay in 3 pieces on the floor. Yet, the bulb itself was untouched, and all 4 bulbs were shining brightly, even though I was sure one of them had burned out. I ran to get my dad, who cleaned up the glass and turned everything off. For as long as I know, that light fixture remains broken. Another time, I was staying up late reading, when a stack of wax paper sheets from a shrinky-dinks kit I had flew off my desk. The sheets circled briefly in the air before scattering across the room. It startled me so badly I nearly screamed, but I had learned to stay quiet. My window was shut, my fan was off, and neither the heater nor the air conditioning could have caused that strong a draft. About a month later, I was walking out of my room when a mason jar full of pencils, pens, and paintbrushes flew past my head, shattering against the door frame beside me. That time I couldn't hold back a scream, but no one was home to hear me. I also had 2 episodes of what felt like sleep paralysis in that room, though I still wonder if they were real or part of something stranger. Number 4. This last memory took place when I was around 4, before my mom, brother, and I moved away. At the time, I slept in a small bed in my parents' room. One night, I woke up crying, and my dad was by my side, trying to wake me from what he thought was a nightmare. The next morning, we discovered 3 deep gashes in the wall above my little bed, as though something had tried to claw at it. The scratches disturbed my parents, and they tried several times to cover them up. They plastered and painted over them, even put posters up to hide the marks, but nothing worked. Every coat of paint seemed to disappear over the scratches, and any poster we tacked or nailed up would eventually fall to the floor, with nails or tacks lying beside it. Years later, when I moved back in, the scratches were still there. Eventually, my grandma had the house renovated, and we stayed in a rental for a few months. When we returned, we were relieved to find the scratches gone. Then we learned that the entire wall had been removed and replaced. It had taken tearing down a wall to finally get rid of those marks. When I was a teenager, we moved to Seattle after my dad's brother passed away in a car accident. My uncle left behind his wife, 6 children, and a family-run tavern. My dad decided to help manage the business to support my uncle's widow. The tavern, popular among the Latino community, stayed open until 1:30 a.m. every night, and my dad was there almost constantly. On weekends, it featured live music with a cover charge. One particular weekend, my dad decided to come home early, completely worn out, so he left the tavern around 11 p.m. At around 1 a.m., I suddenly woke up, without any apparent reason. Shortly after, the phone in my room began to ring. This was before cell phones, and one of our house phones was kept next to my bed. As I reached for it, a dark thought stopped me in my tracks. I don't want to be the one told that Ricky is dead. Ricky was my 23-year-old cousin who worked as security at the tavern. The phone kept ringing. My parents rarely answered late-night calls because 9 out of 10 times they were for me. Finally, my dad got up and answered. Moments later, I heard him yelling angrily. Although I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, I thought, Dad is furious because they killed Ricky, and he wasn't there to help him. I knew, somehow, that Ricky had been shot in the back by an intoxicated customer, and that he was dead. Later, the whole story came out. Ricky had been called to the entrance because a customer, already too drunk, was trying to get inside. Ricky calmly explained that he'd had too much to drink and asked him to come back another day. About an hour later, the man returned with a gun and shot Ricky 4 times in the back. My aunt, Ricky's mother, was told that he died instantly, but I have always felt that wasn't true. I have this sense that he knew what was happening and was terrified. I've never shared this with anyone. It's too sensitive a topic in the family, but I've always wondered how and why I knew he had died before my dad even picked up the phone. When my mom lived in Mexico, she became friends with a neighbor who was a single mom of twin daughters and a son. They were kind-hearted kids who often helped my mom with errands and checked on her regularly. Over the years, whenever I visited, I'd see them around the neighborhood. They always greeted us with a wave and a smile. One weekend, before heading to my mom's, I stopped at a local casino. While playing the slots, I happened to look up and saw the neighbor's son watching me. I smiled at him, but instead of smiling back, he quickly looked away. It felt strange since he was always friendly, but I thought maybe he wasn't supposed to be there. He looked young, perhaps barely 18, the legal gambling age in Mexico. After a few minutes, I saw him again, sitting sideways on a slot machine chair, spinning it slightly. He didn't seem to be playing. He looked like he was waiting for someone, glancing around the rows of machines. Eventually, I forgot about it, and when I looked up again, he was gone. I thought it was odd that he didn't greet me, especially since it seemed like he recognized me. That night, after a little bit of gambling, I finally made it to my mom's house to spend the weekend. As we were talking, she mentioned that she had attended a funeral 2 days prior. She told me the neighbor's son had been killed. He had been out having lunch with friends when 2 gunmen entered the restaurant and started shooting. The neighbor's son was shot in the head and died instantly. I told my mom it couldn't be true. I had just seen him that same day. It wasn't just someone who looked like him, it was him. I planned to tell my mom I'd seen him at the casino, but she told me he had died a week before. I don't know why I saw him, and we weren't particularly close. He didn't appear to be trying to communicate or send any message. He was simply there. About 10 years ago, I was in a meeting with my supervisor, and she excused herself to take a personal call. When she came back, she explained that her mom, who often claimed to feel sick, had driven herself to the hospital. My supervisor brushed it off, saying her mom would often make a fuss about her health, but doctors always reassured her it was nothing serious. As we resumed our meeting, I felt an overwhelming sense that something was wrong. I thought, her mom is going to die, but tried to shake it off. After our meeting, I went out to lunch. When I returned, I was told my supervisor had a family emergency and wouldn't be back. I knew, with absolute certainty, that her mother had passed away. As it turned out, her mother had indeed died at the hospital that day. She was only 60, and her family was devastated. They had always been told her health complaints were minor. My supervisor took her mother's death particularly hard, feeling guilty for not believing her mom's complaints and letting her drive to the hospital alone. I somehow knew her mom didn't want her to feel guilty and regretted that they had argued during their last conversation. But of course I never shared this with my supervisor. There's no logical way I could know this, yet I was certain. In the dead of night, I settled into my room after securing all the doors, taking a moment to update one of my stories on my Kindle. My wife was tending to our baby boy, Jasper, who will be 3 months old on May 22nd, 2023. Around 12:43 a.m., my wife put him down to rest and headed to the restroom, leaving him alone in his crib. Knowing Jasper was alone, I continued to write, but at 12:50 a.m., an inexplicable wave of unease surged through me, urging me back to the room. To my shock, the closet doors were wide open. Both my wife and I distinctly remember closing them. I questioned my teenage kids, but they denied entering the room. My daughter was sound asleep, leaving me to wonder who had opened the closet doors. Jasper's behavior only added to the eerie feeling. He would often giggle, stare at the ceiling, or focus on the darkest corners of the room, seemingly entranced by things only he could see. His fascination with the closet grew more intense, and every time I looked up, he'd be fixated on the top of it. It filled me with a growing sense of dread, yet I couldn't determine whether it was an innocent curiosity or something more disturbing. I decided to set up 2 cameras to monitor his activity. As parents, we couldn't afford to take chances. Despite our vigilance, the cameras captured nothing unusual. So, we tried alternative measures, turning to a ghost tube app for answers. Though skeptical, I thought perhaps this app could provide some clarity. In the beginning, our ghost tube sessions showed nothing out of the ordinary, but recently, we've had increasingly unsettling encounters. The app's responses often seem targeted at me specifically, with phrases like, "Cop Bill," and the disturbing phrase, "Fear me." Holding Jasper during one of these sessions, I watched as the app displayed strange, disjointed words. Kiss, care, above, by, and more in various languages. Although I couldn't decipher the meaning behind each one, it was clear that these messages carried a weight I couldn't ignore. Jasper began coughing and seemed increasingly uneasy, prompting me to take him outside for fresh air. However, as I started to leave the room, the app responded with, "Do not," as if forbidding us to go. As our sessions continued, more words appeared. Levitation, help, Michael, if, and night. Despite the randomness, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were all connected somehow, even if I couldn't make sense of it all. In a particularly chilling moment, the words, "Alexander above," appeared, with a tone that felt as if something was deliberately trying to connect these messages to me. Shortly after, "Fear me," flashed across the screen once more, as if the entity was warning us. The app even called out my name, Alexander, and my son's name, Jasper, as though it knew us personally. I had barely finished reciting the "Our Father" prayer when it ominously stated, "You stopped after I completed an Our Father prayer." The stick figures that the app generated seemed to turn their focus on me and Jasper, as though our presence held some unsettling significance to them. With each session, the messages grew more disturbing, each interaction leaving Jasper visibly affected. His behavior would change the moment the app said his name, and his coughing became more frequent, his restlessness palpable. I could no longer leave him alone, not for a moment. Either my wife or I kept him close at all times. The app's messages made it clear that we needed to exercise extreme caution and stay vigilant. Despite everything, we remain dedicated to keeping our family safe. We're doing all we can to understand what's happening, and if things continue to escalate, I'm prepared to seek professional help. The emotional toll of these events is hard to describe. I'll keep monitoring, protecting Jasper, and if need be, we'll seek further help. Until then, we continue to hope for clarity and safety in our home. In 1992, when I was 16, I moved in with my aunt for a short time. It was during that stay that I had my second encounter with the paranormal. The first time I saw her, I wasn't alone. My aunt was there, too, and we both witnessed it. We were talking, completely relaxed, when we noticed a young girl standing near the edge of the road, staring at us. She looked to be around 10, with long, tangled, dirty blonde hair, as if she hadn't brushed or bathed in a while. She wore a nightgown that reminded me of something from my early childhood in the 1980s, which struck me as strange given that it was the middle of the afternoon. My aunt and I became transfixed by this girl, watching as she stood there, unblinking, before suddenly running off into the vacant land next to my aunt's house. And then, just like that, she vanished. We were both shocked, but neither of us said a word about it to the other. A few days passed without anything unusual happening. But one day, I looked out the same window where we'd first seen her, and there she was again, standing just as before, staring straight at me. We held each other's gaze for a couple of minutes until, once again, she darted into the lot and disappeared. By this point, I knew I wasn't imagining her and became more curious than ever. I decided to go outside and investigate. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I felt drawn to the vacant lot. Wandering around, I found myself in a small group of manzanita trees. In the middle of these trees was a patch of bare dirt that seemed to be calling me. Compelled by an invisible force, I picked up a stick and began digging. It felt as though someone else was guiding my movements, like I was a puppet on strings, aware of what I was doing but with no control. As I dug, the stick struck something. When I pulled it out, I was startled to find a piece of fabric hanging from its end, a fabric eerily similar to the nightgown the girl had been wearing. I dropped the stick in shock and hurried back to my aunt's house, shaken and unsure of what I had just uncovered. I avoided looking toward the lot after that, as if turning my back would somehow make it all disappear. The days following were quiet, until one of my last nights at my aunt's. Unable to sleep, I was sitting up in the guest room, which was adjacent to the lot. From the silence, I heard the faint sound of a child's laughter. I froze, trying to listen more carefully, and there it was again, a little girl's giggle. I looked up to find her face peering through the window, smiling in a way that sent chills down my spine. Her smile was anything but innocent, filled with a dark mischief that left me paralyzed. I stared back, unable to look away. It felt like hours passed with her eyes locked on mine, until finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I pushed a large armoire in front of the window to block her face, but her unsettling giggles continued, echoing into the room and refusing to fade away. I lay in bed, trying to drown out her laughter. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep, but in the morning, I woke up with a sharp, stinging sensation on my abdomen. When I looked, there was a fresh cut, a deep scratch, as if made by a child's small fingernail. That scratch left a scar, one I carry to this day. I moved out of my aunt's house shortly afterward and never returned. But I still wonder about the girl, who she was, what she wanted, and if anyone else has ever seen her since. This incident took place in 1992 in Orange Cove, a small town near Fresno, California. My wife Jen's mother had passed away suddenly that September, so we'd come up from LA to attend the funeral and support Jen's father, Bob. We had no idea that within a month, we'd be back again for Bob's funeral. It was a strange, heavy period, a single month bookend by loss. Jen's parents lived in an old adobe house built by her grandparents in the 1940s. It sat in the middle of an orange orchard, and as far as anyone knew, nothing had been built on that land before the house. The layout was simple and square. The large living and dining room took up the main area, with a kitchen on one side and a long, unlit hallway stretching down the other. This hallway had no electrical outlets or lights, just a small window at the end filled with decorative glass jars and insulators. At night, that hallway was pitch dark, as if the window had been painted black. There were no nearby neighbors or streetlights to cast any glow. The hallway itself connected the main room to the bedrooms and bathroom. Along the hallway, a window looked out to what had once been a porch, now an enclosed laundry room. On the left side of the hallway was the bathroom, and on the right were two bedrooms, with a door for a hall closet between them. To reach the bathroom, you had to walk all the way down the hallway, past the closet. The night after the funeral, we sat with Jen's dad at the large dining table. Jen's sister Cynthia was also there. It was late, dark outside, and the lamps cast dim light across the room. At one point, I excused myself to use the bathroom, heading into the hallway. As I passed the closet door, the strangest thing happened. Every hair on my body stood on end, and a powerful wave of what felt like static electricity hit me square in the chest. It was so intense I could barely breathe. I hadn't touched anything, yet I was frozen in place, overwhelmed by the sensation. After a few seconds of standing there in shock, I managed to get to the bathroom, though I was still buzzing with that strange, tingling energy. I'd never felt anything like it. I've worked with Van de Graaff generators, Tesla coils, capacitors, and other electrical gadgets that pack a punch, but this was entirely different. It was like nothing I'd ever experienced. On my way back down the hallway, the sensation stopped abruptly as soon as I re-entered the main room. Unsteady, I walked over to Jen, who was in the kitchen, and asked, "What the hell is in that hallway?" I must have looked as shaken as I felt because Jen took one look at me and said, "Well, it looks like you've met our ghost." Cynthia overheard and immediately asked, "What? You've seen the ghost too?" As it turned out, both sisters had experienced strange things in that hallway, yet they never shared their experiences with each other. Later, other family members who had stayed in the house over the years were asked if they'd ever noticed anything strange. Each of them admitted that they didn't like going down that hallway in the dark. They all pointed to the area just in front of the closet as particularly unsettling, but no one had ever heard of the ghost leaving the hallway or entering the main room. Over the next few days, I decided to test this tingler, as I started calling it. Every time I walked past the closet, the strange hair-raising, tingling sensation would hit me, though it was far less intense in the daytime. The effect always followed me down the hall to the bathroom, but stopped at the threshold of the living room. It wasn't static electricity, and there was no exposed wiring to explain it. The hallway had no electrical wiring at all. We couldn't figure out any explanation, so we started wondering if something traumatic had occurred on the land, leaving a lingering energy or spirit somehow tied to that spot, perhaps even before the house was built. After Bob passed away and the house sat empty, the tingler began to fade. Each time we returned to visit, the sensation was weaker until, eventually, it was gone altogether. We came to believe that the presence of people in the house had somehow sustained it over the years. Once the house was left vacant, it lost its hold. A few years later, we visited the new owners. Out of curiosity, I walked down the hallway, expecting that familiar tingle, but it was still gone. The energy that had once been so potent had completely dissipated. To this day, I still wonder if there was something under the floor of that hallway, something connected to the land. The house was built with a wooden floor about a foot above the ground, and I doubt the earth beneath was disturbed during construction. Part of me will always wonder, if someone were to dig under that floor where the tingler had once made its presence known, what might they find buried there? The Whaley House in Old Town San Diego is widely regarded as one of the most haunted houses in the United States. Built in 1857 in the Greek Revival style, it stands on the site of a former gallows, likely because the land was cheap. At the time of its construction, it was the largest structure in the city and served various roles, including as the San Diego courthouse and a community theater. Despite the theater's modest size, performances reportedly held up to 150 people, an impressive feat for such a small space. The original inhabitants, the Whaley family, documented strange noises and odd occurrences in their journals as far back as the 1850s and 1860s. Today, the house is said to be haunted by multiple spirits, including Yankee Jim, who was hanged on the property in the early 1850s, and various members of the Whaley family themselves. I've visited the Whaley house 3 times. My first visit was in 2005 over the 4th of July holiday with my sister and cousin, in the mid-afternoon. We found ourselves on the 2nd floor in the theater room, which sits at the end of a hallway near the staircase. The master bedroom, supposedly the most active room in the house, is directly across from the theater, immediately to the right of the staircase. When we entered the theater, a small group was recording in the master bedroom, hoping to catch paranormal activity. They were growing frustrated, saying they hadn't captured anything, and were preparing to leave. I distinctly remember the ding as they turned off the camera. Not a second later, we heard a loud bang coming from the master bedroom. Startled, we watched as the people in the other room ran downstairs and out of the house screaming. Curious, we walked from the theater to the master bedroom, where we were now alone. As soon as we stepped into the room, a full-bodied apparition appeared near the spot where the noise had come from. The figure was dressed in 19th century clothing, and it looked just as real as any living person, except for the face. Its face seemed void of features, more like an impression of a face than an actual one. The figure was unmistakably male, dressed in mid-19th century attire. The apparition ran across the room, heading directly for the closet that connects the master bedroom to the theater. As it moved, it physically affected the room. The closed windows' curtains billowed as though stirred by a strong wind, momentarily covering the lamp in front of the window. Additionally, the carpet beneath the apparition was slightly ruffled, as if it had slipped or kicked the rug in its haste. I was struck by the fact that this apparition wasn't merely a ghostly image. It was interacting with the physical environment as though it were a flesh and blood human. The figure continued its sprint until it reached the hallway closet curtain next to the theater entrance. Just before it would have hit the curtain, it vanished, disappearing mere feet from us. The ghost had been so close, yet it never seemed aware of our presence. It had focused intently on the closet, as if making a desperate escape. I glanced at my sister and cousin, both of whom had witnessed the exact same thing. We quickly went downstairs to find the docent and describe what we'd seen. After listening, the docent confirmed that the person we described matched the figure of Yankee Jim, a prankster known to be particularly active in the master bedroom. He mentioned that our description of the man's clothing also matched what Yankee Jim was reportedly wearing on the day of his execution. The docent seemed as astonished as we were and allowed us to re-enter the master bedroom through the theater. When we returned to the room, everything was as it had been before the encounter, except for the ruffled curtain and carpet. There were no signs of any trickery, no projectors' strings, or anything that could have been used to fake what we'd seen. It was just an old bedroom, untouched by modern technology. The three of us could have questioned our senses, but with all of us seeing the same thing, including the tangible changes to the curtain and carpet, it was hard to deny. The docent recorded our experience in a book on the first floor of the house, which kept track of all reported paranormal activity. Years later, on my second visit, the docent remembered my experience vividly. He knew my name, where I was from, and even the details of what I'd seen. The book had made an impression. During this second visit, I was the last guest out of the house along with the docent as he locked up. As I stepped outside and looked up at the second floor windows, I saw another apparition. This time, it was only a partial figure. The upper body was clearly visible, but the lower half was indistinct, fading below the shoulders. Although I was the only one to see this figure, I managed to capture it on video. Unfortunately, the footage is on an analog tape, and I don't have the means to play it right now. Given that the house was empty and locked up, it wasn't a trick of light or projection. Besides, as I'd noted before, a projection system sophisticated enough to create such a detailed apparition would be impossible to hide within the confines of the Whaley house. I genuinely believe I witnessed two apparitions in the Whaley house, one full-bodied and one partial, and I struggled to find any other explanation. The experience with Yankee Jim in the master bedroom felt incredibly real and defied logical reasoning. It seems more plausible to believe that ghosts, or whatever we call them, exist within a framework of reality we simply don't fully understand yet. Ghosts have shown themselves to be detectable by certain electronic equipment, such as EVP, electronic voice phenomena, recorders, thermal sensors, and full-spectrum cameras, suggesting that these phenomena are scientifically testable. But I digress. My encounters at the Whaley house were complete accidents. I wasn't actively seeking anything paranormal, and just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Given Yankee Jim's reputation for pranks and his habit of avoiding direct interaction, I assume he shows himself only when he thinks no one is watching. It's fascinating to consider that the Whaley family themselves reported hauntings in the 1800s. If Yankee Jim is indeed the ghost they spoke of, he has haunted the Whaley house for over 160 years. My most recent visit was in 2013, this time as part of a guided tour. Unlike my previous visits, where I'd freely explored the house, this time I stayed with the group and didn't see anything out of the ordinary. If the Whaley house had somehow installed high-tech projection equipment, you'd think they would activate it during that tour when the house was filled with visitors. But once again, nothing happened while in a large group. My experiences only occurred when I was alone or with a few people. On that latest visit, I asked about the book that recorded paranormal activity, but I was told no such book existed. I assume management has changed, and the record was removed, but I distinctly remember entering my experience years ago. Do I believe the Whaley house is haunted? Absolutely, especially the second floor. Growing up, I was constantly told ghost stories by my dad, who swore he'd had paranormal experiences as a kid. My aunt and uncles would back him up, sharing their own stories about strange things they'd witnessed. One of the most bizarre stories involved my dad, his sister, 2 brothers, and my grandmother using a Ouija board they'd bought from a Toys R Us. Apparently, my aunt, who was only 8 at the time, started levitating. Her eyes rolled back, and her voice turned into that of a grown man. I always laughed off their stories, convinced ghosts weren't real. But that all changed when we moved to Texas. The house we moved into had originally been a small, 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom home that had caught fire years before, claiming the lives of the family who lived there. The house had been renovated into a 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom place, and the room that became mine had once been the attic. At first, the strange occurrences were subtle. I'd notice figures walking past, objects moving around, or doors slamming shut. But before long, I'd wake up in the middle of the night to see a man or woman standing right beside me. I'd also hear the voice of a little boy calling out for his mommy, but it was never my brother's. It got pretty intense until, eventually, we moved out. One experience stands out in particular. My cousin and I were doing our makeup in the bathroom one day, competing to see who could do the worst job, both bathroom doors open. I was sure I'd won based on her shocked expression, until I realized she wasn't looking at me, she was staring behind me. I turned around, and there, standing next to me, was a white figure. We were so freaked out that we locked the bathroom doors and ran straight to my room. That same week, we'd just come back from a Valentine's dance, and a storm had knocked the power out. We were eating pizza on the stairs, lighting the area with these little fake candles my mom loved. As we sat there, we heard a door creak open behind us, my bedroom door, which always squeaked. I turned around and saw a small, black figure, about the size of a young child, darting from my room into my brother's. My cousin didn't see it, but she knew something was wrong from the look on my face. She asked if it might have been one of my brothers, but we found both of them fast asleep downstairs in my parents' room. Later that night, my cousin and I were in bed in my room, with her tucked up against the wall and me on the side closer to the door. I woke up in the middle of the night with an odd feeling, and when I rolled over, I saw a man standing beside me. At first, I thought it was my dad checking in on us, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw him clearly, a man in an army uniform, standing with his arms crossed over his chest and smiling gently. Strangely, I felt calm looking at him, even comforted. But when my cousin stirred next to me, I looked away for a moment, and when I looked back, the man was fading, his body disappearing from the waist down. He gave a small wave before vanishing completely. After a while, I stopped feeling scared. I realized that these spirits, or whatever they were, weren't trying to harm us. They seemed content to coexist, and eventually, I got used to their presence. We stayed in that house for 2 years before moving to an even smaller town in Texas, with a population of less than 1,500. The moment I stepped into the new house, I felt a strange familiarity, like I'd been there before. As I explored my soon-to-be bedroom, I found myself wandering outside to a stone with the date 11-31-70 carved into it, marking when the house was built. I felt a sudden chill of déjà vu and a creeping sense that I didn't belong there. Over the next few nights, I'd catch the smell of smoke out of nowhere, and couldn't shake the feeling that I was trapped. The worst were the dreams. I dreamed repeatedly that I was trapped in my room as it burned around me. In one of these dreams, I saw a man who looked as though he'd been badly burned, standing just outside my door. We left that house within a year. When we moved back to California, I hoped my experiences with ghosts were over. But it seemed like they had followed me. My brother and I shared a room, and that summer, he began complaining that I'd freak him out at night. Apparently, I'd sit up in my sleep, pointing at random spots in the room, and muttering about a woman watching us. The first night, I pointed to the door and said, "She's standing right there." The next night, I pointed at the air vent above us and said, "She's watching us." On the third night, I pointed to the end of the bed and said, "She's coming for us." After that, I'd start screaming. My brother was so disturbed by my sleep stories that he kept the lights on after that, but I couldn't help it if he couldn't see the eyeless woman I saw. Before moving to Texas, I never believed in ghosts. But now, I'm starting to think that maybe they're following me. Between 2000 and 2003, my wife and I lived in an apartment building in Southern California while she attended medical school. Looking back, I'm convinced that apartment held an otherworldly presence. Whether it was benign or malevolent, I can't say for sure, but the experiences I had there were unmistakably strange. The first sign of something unusual was a series of recurring night terrors, almost always centered on one theme: creatures under the bed. I'd wake up, convinced I felt snakes or rats crawling around my legs, and on more than one occasion, I even felt the sensation of spiders scuttling beneath the sheets. Each time, I'd jolt awake in a cold sweat, leaping out of bed in sheer panic. My wife would try to comfort me, but these episodes became so frequent that they unnerved us both. I tried to attribute them to stress, but other strange occurrences made me question that assumption. In addition to the night terrors, I often woke up feeling as if someone had broken into our apartment. I can't fully explain it. It was more of an instinct than anything concrete. I'd lie there, wide awake, straining to catch any sounds that might reveal an intruder. Every time, I'd end up rushing out of the bedroom to confront what I thought was a burglar in the living room, only to find everything secure. The door was locked, nothing was amiss, yet the sensation of someone else being there was palpable. At the time, I brushed it off as my imagination, but in retrospect, I think it was something else entirely, a presence. One night, I encountered something that left an even deeper impression. I was lying in bed, fully awake, when I noticed movement near the bedroom door. It was dark, but I could clearly see a shadow crossing the room, moving from the bedroom doorway toward the bathroom. The bathroom door was open, and the shadow figure seemed to slip inside. At first, I thought it might have been my wife, but a quick glance beside me confirmed that she was sound asleep. The strangest part was that I could not only see the shadow but hear it too, as if it were a real person walking across our carpeted floor. Oddly, I didn't feel scared. By that point, I had grown accustomed to strange events and simply chalked it up as another encounter. But one experience in that apartment still gives me chills whenever I think about it. We had a futon couch in the living room, and one night, too lazy to go to bed after watching TV, I decided to sleep on it. It wasn't a comfortable bed, and I spent most of the night in a half-awake state. But during one of these restless moments, I became aware of a woman's voice. Groggily, I looked over toward the bedroom door and saw a blurred image of a woman walking toward me, talking as she came closer. She was dressed in all white, and her face was indistinct. At first I thought it was my wife, telling me to come to bed, but as the woman approached and leaned down as if to speak, she began to fade, disappearing entirely. I sat there for several seconds, stunned and trying to process what I'd just seen. I couldn't make out her words or any detail in her face. She was just there, and then, she wasn't. After that, I bolted to the bedroom. I never saw the woman again. One particularly sinister night terror stands out as well. It didn't involve animals or insects like the others, but instead centered on a man attempting to hang himself in our bedroom. I had no idea who he was, but even as he tied the noose, he taunted me, almost like he wanted me to watch him do it to unsettle me. There was no plea for help, just a cruel, mocking tone as he carried out the act. When I woke up, the image was seared into my mind, and it lingered for days afterward. This happened just before we moved out, and by then, I was almost numb to the strangeness of it all. After 3 years, my wife finished her training, and we finally moved away. It wasn't until later that I began piecing everything together: the night terrors, the sensation of a break-in, the shadow figure, the woman in white. There was no doubt in my mind that apartment was haunted. By what or whom, I'll never know. Oddly, I was the only one who seemed affected. My wife never mentioned any unusual experiences, though she might have just kept them to herself. Like with many hauntings, these incidents didn't happen every day. Weeks, sometimes even months, would go by without any disturbances, which made it harder to label the place as haunted while we were there. Since then, I've encountered other instances of strange activity in my life, but nothing has left the impression that apartment did. As I see it now, there's a spiritual world around us, one we don't fully understand. Whether I was catching glimpses of otherworldly figures or being specifically targeted by a presence, I can't say for certain. But one thing's for sure, those 3 years left me with a deeper understanding of the unseen. My husband, Mike, always wears glasses, except when we go into a casino. Recently, our grandson found a website offering 2 pairs of glasses with frames for just about $6. Brand name frames, any prescription you wanted. Mike ordered a couple of pairs and got them in about 6 weeks, and he loves them. One day, we were driving up to Red Hawk, an Indian casino in Shingle Springs about 45 minutes from home. I glanced over at Mike, admiring his new glasses and thinking about what a great deal he got. I decided then and there I'd get my next pair from the same site. When we arrived at the casino, he did his usual routine, took his glasses off, placed them on the car's ashtray, locked the car, and we headed inside. After a few hours we left, but when we got back in the car, his glasses were nowhere to be found. We checked the ashtray, the floor, and the seats but came up empty. Luckily, he had his second pair, so he put those on and said we'd look more thoroughly when we got home. We did, but still, no glasses. I even went back out to search again after he fell asleep, but they were truly gone. The next day, I was sitting in my recliner, watching TV, when I noticed a small shadow out of the corner of my eye. I didn't think much of it at first. I occasionally see what I call visitors, so it's something I've come to expect. But then I saw something I can't quite explain. At the bottom left corner of the wall-mounted TV, I noticed a black drip forming. Slowly, it stretched down about 6 inches and disappeared behind the sofa table in front of the TV. There was nothing there when I went to check. I sat back down, more puzzled than anything. To give you a sense of the room's layout, the TV is mounted on a wall adjacent to the fireplace. The fireplace has a brick mantel that runs the length of the wall, sticking out about 18 inches from the floor, and is covered with plants, rocks, and little keepsakes that probably belong somewhere else. One of the plants is a large split-leaf philodendron, which hangs over the edge of the mantel. I'd barely settled back into the TV show when, on the opposite side of the drip, a light blue orb or bubble floated out from behind the screen. It drifted under the philodendron's leaves, making them sway as it passed, then disappeared. By now, I was definitely wondering what was going on. And about 20 minutes later, something else caught my eye. 2 overlapping square lights, about 6 inches each, vibrating rapidly up on the wall near Mike's recliner by the ceiling. They seemed solid, yet they were flickering back and forth so quickly they almost looked like they were pulsing. I watched the lights for a good 5 seconds, reaching to put down the remote so I could get a closer look, but before I could stand up, there was a loud pop, and they vanished. The strangeness didn't stop there. My dog, Rosie, and my cat, Tucker, both started acting very oddly. Usually, Rosie lies on the cool tile floor, especially on a hot day like this one, but instead, she jumped up on my chair and pressed herself against me. Meanwhile, Tucker was tearing around the house like a maniac, racing down the hallway, darting into the kitchen, then the laundry room, where he crashed into the garbage can, knocking it over. He sauntered back into the kitchen, trying to act dignified, but I couldn't help laughing and calling him an idiot. Later that day, Mike came home, did his usual routine, checked the mail, changed into his pajamas, grabbed a snack, and settled into his recliner. He reached down to move a blanket off his chair and suddenly said, "Oh, thanks for finding my glasses, Han." He was still wearing his backup pair. I looked over at him and asked him to repeat himself, and he held up the missing glasses, which had been sitting on the fireplace mantel next to his chair. Confused, I told him I hadn't found his glasses. "We both looked everywhere, even after we got home, and I went back out to check again after you went to bed," I reminded him. He looked at me with a puzzled expression and said, "I don't know, and I don't want to talk about it." Mike believes in ghosts, but he doesn't like discussing them. The whole day felt surreal, and I wondered if all the strange events were connected. I never felt scared or anxious, just slightly unsettled, with a nagging feeling that something beyond explanation was going on. And I still don't know what that drip on the TV was all about. I should add that I've had strange experiences at Red Hawk Casino before. I'm convinced the place is haunted, and several employees have quietly confirmed similar feelings. It's nothing malevolent, just a sense of a lingering presence, almost as if something's quietly reminding everyone, I'm here. In my 6-day work week as a security guard, I was assigned to watch over 3 different locations from 2 p.m. to 12 a.m. Each post came with its own, haunted, warnings from coworkers, but none was more notorious than the recycling yard where I worked on Fridays and Saturdays. By the time of my eerie encounter, I'd already been stationed there twice a week for 6 months. Countless guards had come and gone, some requested day shifts, others refused to return, and a few even quit outright. The stories surrounding the place were laughable, honestly. The motion detecting lights keep turning on, but when I check, no one's there. Some guards would say this in hushed tones, as if revealing some great mystery. I'd roll my eyes. It was an open-air recycling yard, and we were surrounded by rats, cats, birds, and other night-loving creatures. Or, I saw a strange figure once, like a man, but sickly and moaning like a zombie. Welcome to Southern California's neighborhoods, where you're as likely to encounter people struggling with addiction as you are ghostly apparitions. Part of my job was to keep them out, after all. One Sunday, my only day off, my boss called, asking if I could cover the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift. The new guard had quit after just one night. She'd been terrified by the spooky ghosts that apparently came out with the sunrise, as the metal containers started popping and making noise. She had hidden in her car to save herself from the spirits. My boss laughed, understanding that those were just the natural sounds of metal expanding with the morning heat. But with the guard gone, I was stuck with 7-day work weeks. That Sunday night, a storm rolled in, huge flashes of lightning and rumbles of thunder. As a new father, I was terrified the copper containers scattered around the yard would act as magnets for lightning. On the phone with my boss, I begged to stay in my car. I was scared for my life, but she reminded me I had to keep doing rounds. She and the client agreed I could avoid going near the copper until the storm passed. Thankfully, lightning never struck that night. But the real fright wasn't from the storm. That would come later, during my regular shift. On a Saturday afternoon, I arrived at the recycling yard for my usual shift. I did my rounds, fed the junkyard cats some tuna, routine stuff. But that afternoon, I noticed something unusual between 2 of my checkpoints, an old refrigerator and a huge pocket watch-looking clock. The sight of them filled me with a sense of unease I couldn't shake. One of the junkyard cats, an orange and white kitten I'd named Rebel, followed me like he often did. He was the only cat in the yard who would approach me. As I stood there, eyeing the fridge and clock, I asked, "What do you think, Rebel?" Naturally, he didn't respond. I tried to play it cool, but the feeling of dread was real. I convinced myself I'd check the objects out later. As night fell, my sense of unease only grew. Voices echoed through the yard, which wasn't unusual. I often had to confront addicts, homeless people, and teenage vandals who wandered onto the property. Typically, I'd ask them to leave, and they'd comply without issue. The one time someone challenged me, a guy trying to steal a forklift battery in broad daylight. He ran at me with a pry bar, so I picked up a rebar and ran back at him, screaming like a madman. He backed off. But tonight was different. I heard voices throughout my rounds, and no matter how many times I followed the sound, I found nothing. The yard was shaped like a U, surrounded by high walls, with a building I didn't have access to in the middle. Every time I thought I had cornered the voices, I'd find myself in an empty section of the yard, the voices fading away. Growing frustrated, I squeezed between 2 stacks of pallets to return to my car. That's when I heard the voices again, this time, from a pile of car bumpers under the solar yard light. I approached slowly, flashlight in hand, ready to confront whoever was hiding there. But as I circled the pile, there was no one. Yet the voices continued, whispering in a language I didn't recognize. SPSSP ha 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 SSSS sisa. It was like nothing I'd heard before. Just sounds eerie and nonsensical. You can't be here," I stammered, my voice breaking the silence. Immediately, everything went quiet. Seconds passed, and then, with a loud crash, 3 bumpers, one from the top, one from the middle, and one from the bottom, flew out from the pile, hurtling straight at me. I yelped and stumbled back, landing hard on the ground. For a few minutes, I sat there, catching my breath, unable to believe what had just happened. After regaining my composure, I dusted myself off and stood, glancing nervously at the spot where the bumpers lay. I tried to tell myself it was just gravity, or maybe a stray cat that had knocked them loose. But deep down, I knew something else was at work. Reluctantly, I turned to my right, and there it was, that fridge and clock, right beside me. Despite my efforts to avoid them, somehow, in my pursuit of the voices, I'd ended up exactly where I didn't want to be. No way," I muttered, inching closer to the refrigerator. The door was ajar, and the face of the clock lay detached on the ground. The unease returned, stronger than before. My instinct told me to get out, but instead, I forced myself to inspect the refrigerator. Inside, everything looked normal, but my hands were trembling as I searched. I turned to the clock. As I picked it up, Rebel appeared again, sitting on a nearby concrete block, watching me with his curious eyes. "Nothing here, Rebel," I said, hoping to calm my own nerves. But just then, the hands on the clock began spinning wildly. I dropped it, my heart pounding as I stumbled back. Rebel bolted alongside me as I sprinted for my car, not stopping until I was safely inside. I sat there, catching my breath, too shaken to make sense of what had happened. The following week, I noticed the clock was still there, only it looked like someone had smashed it with a hammer. The refrigerator had been tossed over the east wall. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night. It left me questioning everything, and while I still don't scare easily, I'll never forget the fear I felt at that haunted recycling yard. When I was around 15 or 16, I ended up alone at home one evening because my family had gone to a party. My mom was really hesitant to leave me by myself, especially since they planned to stay out late. I remember pleading with her, telling her I needed to work on homework and didn't feel well enough to be at a party. She finally agreed to let me stay, but only on the condition that I stayed inside, didn't answer the door for anyone, and didn't tell anyone on the phone that I was home alone. I promised to follow all her rules, so my parents and siblings left around 6 p.m., promising to be back by midnight. I was thrilled to have the house to myself, blasting music, making a mess in the kitchen, and staying on the phone with my best friend. Coincidentally, next door to my friend lived one of the popular kids from school, who had a few friends over. They were hanging out with skateboards, and my friend kept looking out her window while we were on the phone, giving me updates on everything they were doing. She kept insisting I come over, especially since she only lived a couple of blocks away. Finally, I gave in. I thought I'll just drop something off, say hi for 10 minutes, and run back home. It was early enough. I figured I could pull it off. I went over to her house, and as I approached, she sneaked out. We started talking, and soon enough, the guys noticed us and invited us to come over and hang out. I remember the flirting, the giggling, and attempting to ride their skateboards. I was having the time of my life. Eventually, a neighbor came out and told us to be quiet because we were making too much noise. That's when it hit me. I was in so much trouble. I quickly told everyone I had to go, and took off running for home as fast as I could. All the way to my house, I was praying that my dad's car wouldn't be in the driveway. I remember running and mumbling, "Please, please, please don't let them be there," and when I was close and didn't see a car, I whispered, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." But just as I thought I'd gotten away with it, I saw a massive black dog blocking my path to the yard. Now, I was always afraid of dogs. We'd never had a pet dog, and this one was huge, looked angry, and was growling at me. I decided to cross the street and try to go around it, but as if it could read my mind, it moved to block me again. I stood there for a while, running through different plans in my mind, but each one ended with me getting attacked by this giant dog. Then I started worrying about my parents coming home and finding out I'd snuck out. I wasn't sure what would be worse. Finally, I decided to risk it. I crossed the street again, put my head down, stuck my fingers in my ears, and just walked toward the house, shaking with fear. I kept my head down the entire time, and soon enough, I found myself at the front gate. I opened it and walked through, still feeling like the dog was right behind me. Once inside the yard, I knew I wasn't completely safe. The fence wasn't high, and I just knew that dog could jump it if it wanted to. I kept walking, chills running down my spine, until I reached the front door. I slipped inside the house, closed the door, and immediately ran to the window to see where the dog had gone. But when I looked out, I didn't see it anywhere. I was standing on my tiptoes, trying to look over the fence, when I saw the headlights of my dad's car pulling into the driveway. My nosy sister spotted me and immediately ratted me out to my parents. They asked what I was doing at the window, so I told them I had heard a dog barking and saw a huge black dog outside. They checked outside but didn't see any dog. They figured it was probably a stray or lost, since none of our neighbors had large dogs. Given that we lived on a dead-end street, they assumed it must have gone into someone's yard, but no one saw it on the street when they arrived. That night was the first and last time I ever saw that dog. Maybe it wasn't anything paranormal, but it taught me a lesson. This is one of those stories I never told my family, because I know I was doing something I shouldn't have been, and even now, as an adult, I know my mom would still scold me for it. I've lived in the same house for many years, and every year, something strange happens. Sometimes it's scary, other times, just annoying. In a full house of 9 people, not everyone has had an experience. My 2 little brothers have never seen or heard anything. One of my younger sisters once heard whispering, but my other 2 younger sisters haven't experienced a thing. My older brother just thinks we're all crazy. My older sister had one experience that left her shaken. She had an encounter with a doll that froze her in place. She couldn't do anything but scream at the top of her lungs, though somehow, nobody heard her for the first 5 minutes. Eventually, everyone was there. My mother knows there's something in the house, but I think she's holding back on what she's experienced. My first encounter was more of a feeling, just an unsettling sense of something there, nothing concrete. I thought I was just making things up in my head, and this feeling went on for weeks. To calm myself down, I decided to record a conversation with thin air, hoping it would give me some peace. But when I played back the recording, I heard a faint whisper say, "I want your power." I had no idea what that meant, but strangely, the feeling stopped not long after that. Some time later, objects started moving around me, falling, flying, floating, opening, and closing. At that time, it only happened to me, and I couldn't understand why. My family thought I was losing my mind. Even my mother, who knew something was up, denied the ghost's existence. And then, as suddenly as it had started, it all stopped. The next year, it came back, but now it was moving things behind my back. I'd be doing dishes, turn around to place a cup of milk on the table, turn back to the sink, and then find the cup gone. Where did it go? I look around, and there it was in the sink, still half full. Another time, my backpack did the same thing. I started calling it Ghosty, thinking it was harmless fun. Big mistake. Don't name it. Soon, it started making clicking sounds, like the noise people make with their tongues. I tried recording another conversation using my phone's voice recorder, but this time, nothing happened. I played back the recording twice, heard nothing, turned it off, and muttered, "Thanks for nothing, Ghosty." And then, out of nowhere, a loud, clear voice replied, "You don't need that to hear me." I froze, heart racing, unable to move. When a voice appears out of nowhere and speaks in full sentences, all you can do is sit there, too stunned to move. I heard it talking more frequently after that, but after some time, the voice vanished again. For the next few years, it was the same cycle, small things here and there, with one big occurrence before everything would stop for another year. Eventually, I started searching online, reading books, and talking to people about it. One piece of advice that actually helped came from the Bible. I'm not overly religious, but I do believe in God, heaven, hell, and all of that. I'm not here to preach, but the Bible said not to engage with it. I decided to listen and stop talking to it. And just like that, it was gone. No more voices, no more moving objects. There were a few random whispers saying my name once in a while, but eventually, I'd yell at it to stop, and it would. Now, once a year, something small and random happens to someone in the house. Nothing big. Over the years, I've learned more about ghosts and different types of spirits. I've even helped others with their own issues and solved a few minor cases on my own. You can't get rid of a ghost entirely, but if you stop giving it attention, it stops bothering you. Last night, something strange happened to me. I was lying in bed with the lights off, scrolling through emails on my phone, when I heard a loud popping sound, followed by something hard hitting the ceiling and then hitting me square in the forehead. I sat up quickly and turned on the lamp, looking around my room and thinking, what the hell was that? Then I noticed that a bottle of water sitting on my nightstand was missing its cap. The cap was probably what hit me in the head, but I had no idea where it bounced off to, and I didn't get up to look for it. I was sure the bottle was capped when I went to bed and turned off the light. I couldn't understand how it had uncapped itself, flown up, hit the ceiling, and bounced down to hit me in the forehead. The only thing in the bottle was water, and the bottle was sitting upright without spilling a drop, as if it hadn't even been squeezed. I decided to lie back down, but this time, I left the light on and went back to reading my emails. That's when I started feeling a gentle touch on my feet. Instead of kicking my feet like I usually would, I stayed still, looked down, and saw that my blanket was very slowly moving up my feet, exposing them. I froze, just staring at my feet as it happened. After a few seconds, reality sank in, and I jumped up and ran out of the room. I didn't want to scare my son, so I stood outside my bedroom, trying to gather the courage to go back in. Needless to say, sleep was a long time coming. A few days earlier, I had another unsettling experience. I had a friend over, and we were planning to have tea. I was standing by the stove, waiting for the water to boil, while she sat on a stool at the breakfast bar, talking to me. Out of nowhere, one of the burners lit up by itself, freaking us both out. I had been standing there for at least 5 minutes without touching any knobs except the one for the teapot. The burner that turned on wasn't even near the one that was already lit. We were both speechless. Not long before that, another strange thing happened. I was using the restroom when I heard a light knock on the door. Assuming it was my son, I said, "Wait, I'll be done in a minute." While washing my hands, I heard the knocking again, this time louder, so I got annoyed and shouted, "I said to wait! If you can't wait, go downstairs and use the other restroom." I didn't hear any reply. When I came out, I saw my son in his bedroom, so I told him the bathroom was free. He looked at me, confused, and said, "Okay?" I replied, "Well, it sounded like you couldn't wait." He swore he hadn't knocked on the door. He and I were the only ones home, and the cat was sound asleep in his room. Another time, my kids were out with friends, and I was alone in the house. I was lying in bed, reading a book, when I heard someone outside my bedroom say, "Mommy." Without thinking, I responded, "Yes, I'm in here." Silence followed, and then it hit me, my kids weren't home, and they don't even call me Mommy anymore. The voice I heard was of a much younger child. I have no idea what's going on. I've had paranormal experiences before, but things had been quiet for a long time. I can't pinpoint what might have stirred things up. I've also been dealing with some strange occurrences at my house in Mexico, but all of these incidents have happened in my home in California. I remember a few psychics once told me that I have a very bright and powerful light that attracts both good and bad spirits. To be honest, I never took them seriously because I don't feel I have any special abilities, at least none that I know how to use. And I'm not sure I even want to know. The idea of random ghosts in my house is unsettling, and if it's a dead relative, that's even worse. If they're here to warn me, it makes me anxious about what's coming, and if they're here to comfort me, it makes me worry about why I need comforting. I also don't like the thought of them having unfinished business. I just want them to be at peace. A couple of weeks ago, I performed a cleansing at my house in Mexico, but I'm not sure if it worked because I haven't been back since then. I'll be returning this weekend, so hopefully it made a difference. After my previous experiences quieted down, I stayed in Puerto Rico for about 5 more years without anything paranormal happening. Even during my first 3 years living in San Francisco, California, I didn't encounter anything unusual. But then, after I developed a regular meditation practice and occasionally experimented with psychedelics, strange experiences started to reappear. Little things would happen while I was tripping or meditating that could easily be explained by the altered states, yet they felt too real to dismiss entirely. Whether it was the meditation, psychedelics, or both, it felt like my third eye had opened, and I began to have more vivid, unexplainable experiences, even while completely sober. One night, I was struggling to fall asleep, restless but not feeling watched or uncomfortable. Frustrated, I got up, and that's when I saw a figure standing at the end of my bed, casually leaning against the wall and watching me. The figure was tall and broad, with no discernible face, almost like a shadow in the shape of a person, dressed in a white turtleneck sweater. Oddly, I didn't feel scared or sense anything malevolent. In fact, it seemed more startled to see me looking at it. It even made a small, surprised movement, as though realizing I could see it. Slowly, it backed away, almost as if it didn't want to disturb me. Relieved that it left on its own, I settled back into bed and tried again to sleep. A few nights later, I had the strangest dream of my life. Normally, I dream vivid, movie-like scenes, but this time, it felt more like I was lying in bed with my eyes open. In the dream, I could see my husband spooning me from behind while I spooned someone else. As soon as I realized this, something or someone forcefully pulled me down through the bed, and I found myself halfway through the floor. In my desperation to escape, I frantically kicked and struggled, feeling as though my neighbors below could see me flailing. I swam up so intensely that I almost touched the ceiling before I fell back down into my original self, still lying in bed. When I woke up, I was still moving, startling my husband awake. I told him what happened, and ever the skeptic, he suggested that I might have had an out-of-body experience. The next experience happened days, maybe weeks, after a memorable psychedelic trip. During that trip, I felt as though I'd entered the realm of the dead, though in hindsight, realm of the spirits might be more accurate. I had brief flashes of fear because I sensed we were being watched, as though something was waiting for us to mess up. While tripping, I saw what looked like Chinese dragons, morphing and shifting in trippy colors. Although they weren't terrifying, the sight of these otherworldly creatures unnerved me a little. Days later, while sober, I'd been feeling disappointed in a dream catcher I'd recently bought because I didn't think it was working. One night, I woke up crouching in bed, staring intensely at the dream catcher with a frustrated glare. I even voiced my annoyance at it, and as soon as I did, I thought, "Oh, here they come." Just then, the Chinese dragons from my trip reappeared, passing through the room. Calmly, as if it were an everyday routine, I climbed back into my body. When I fully came to, I was confused but felt like I understood what had happened, given my previous experience. The last, and by far the most terrifying experience, was a sleep paralysis episode unlike any other I'd had. I dealt with sleep paralysis before and usually managed to brush it off with a scientific explanation. But this time, even with logic in mind, it felt too real and horrifying to ignore. I was dreaming of a monstrous creature, larger than anything I'd ever imagined, so massive that if it stood, it would reach the ceiling. The creature was muscular beyond human limits, with horns and other non-human features. It pinned me down, holding my wrists apart with hands that didn't feel entirely human. And then it began to scream, an unbearable, guttural sound that I can't adequately describe. It went on for nearly a full minute, and as the sound echoed in my head, I tried to reassure myself by thinking, just open your eyes and it'll stop. When I finally woke up, I couldn't see the creature, but the scream continued in my ears, and I felt an unbearable weight pinning me down. Recognizing the sensation as sleep paralysis, I tried to calm myself, but this experience was unlike anything I'd been through before. When the weight finally lifted, I noticed my wrists were still in the exact position the creature had held them in during the dream. I want to believe it was all just a sleep paralysis hallucination, but with everything I'd experienced, I'm no longer sure. First, a little background. My father's family served as caretakers of a very old cemetery in Kentucky throughout his childhood. To hear him tell it, he and his family were constantly around death and the supernatural, though he rarely spoke about it. His oldest brother stayed on to continue the caretaking after my father left to join the military, and it seems like the position has passed down through generations. We didn't have much contact with my father's family, except for his youngest brother, Uncle Ralph. My mother had strong opinions about Ralph. She'd call him a devil worshipper, and other things that weren't exactly nice, though she never forbade him from visiting us or stopped us from visiting him. Ralph lived in an apartment outside of Antioch, California. The front faced a quiet street, but the back opened onto a vast, empty area leading into the hills just outside of Old Summersville, near Summersville Road and up to the Black Diamond Mines. For those familiar with the area, it's well known for its activity. Rose Hill Cemetery nearby has a reputation of its own, though I didn't know this until much later. This detail fits perfectly with what I experienced there, and especially with an unsettling experience my brother had as well. As kids, there were 5 of us, and we would spend entire days at Uncle Ralph's, exploring the hills and wandering until sunset or dinner time. When we returned, we'd all have to wash up in his bathroom before eating. It was always a chaotic scene, 5 kids, ages 8 to 16, crammed in and scrambling to get clean. Looking back, I'm sure we made more of a mess than anything else, but it was fun. Being the youngest and a girl, I was usually smaller and often the last to get my turn, which meant I was also the last to eat. One day, I decided to be clever and avoid the scramble. Instead of trying to get to the sink where my brothers were fighting over the soap and water, I turned to the bathtub, planning to wash up there. The curtain was closed, so I pulled it back, and nearly jumped out of my skin. Sitting in the tub, water stained around her up to her chin, was a little girl, younger than me, maybe around 5. I yelped, and my oldest brother came over, shoving me aside as he reached down to turn on the water, completely ignoring the girl in the tub. Just as I was about to yell at him, she and the dark-stained water vanished. I ended up last to dinner again that night, but strangely, I had no appetite. Throughout the evening, I kept catching glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, but later that night, as I sat brushing my hair, I saw her again. This time, she was standing right in front of me. She looked bruised, broken, and frightening, not just because she was an apparition or because she was unclothed, but because of her condition. Her skin appeared smeared with dirt and blood, and her hair was matted and filthy. Terrified, I screamed, and my uncle came rushing in from outside, where he'd been smoking with my 16-year-old brother. To my surprise, he spoke to the girl. "You're not supposed to scare the kids," he said. With that, the girl vanished in an instant. Uncle Ralph took my hairbrush and began brushing my hair while I clung to him, scared out of my wits. When I asked who she was, he told me she was a friend of his, playing a mean trick, and that if I saw anyone scary again, I should tell him right away. He assured me I was safe, that everything was okay now. When I got home, I told my mom I didn't want to go back to Uncle Ralph's because of his mean friends. I described the girl, and my mother's face went pale before turning fiery. She agreed I didn't have to go back, and I never returned. About 6 years later, my mother cut all ties with Uncle Ralph, and we didn't see him for over a decade after that. I wasn't disappointed, and even now, I agree with her decision. Looking back, if I were in her shoes, I wouldn't have let any of my children go back there or visit my uncle again. My story began in 1982. My dad, who had served in the military for 32 years and worked for NASA afterward, was eligible to travel anywhere in the world by military transport along with my mom. All they had to do was wait for available room on a flight and pay a nominal fee for meals. Hong Kong had long been on their bucket list, so they arranged a 2-week trip. Worried about leaving their house empty for that long, they asked me to house sit. There had been a series of burglaries in the area targeting vacant homes, which added to their concerns. The house where I grew up was never a cozy, inviting place. I'd heard a rumor that a 13-year-old boy had killed himself with a shotgun there a couple of years before we moved in, but I couldn't confirm it, and asking about it was strictly forbidden. The house was a typical California ranch style from the late 60s with a classic L-shaped layout and tile roof. My parents had gotten a suspiciously good deal on it. Even with all the windows and doors open, it felt perpetually dark, like the house was swallowing any light. When you entered through the front door, the kitchen and family room were to the right, the living room to the left, and a long hallway led back to 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. The energy of the house always put me on edge. At night, we would often hear footsteps moving down the hallway, turning, and heading to the kitchen where a built-in desk held a phone, answering machine, and fax machine. Almost nightly, the fax machine would start dialing on its own, and the phone's speaker would pick up ringing, though thankfully no one ever answered. My dad, an ex-search and rescue man, shut down any talk of it with a single look, something familiar to anyone who grew up in a military family. When my parents left for their trip, I set up camp on the family room couch, choosing to stay as close to the front door as possible. I was on edge, knowing there were strange presences in the house. I stayed up late the first night, finally drifting off around 2 a.m. But right at 3 a.m., the classic hour, the sound of footsteps began. Step, shuffle, step, all the way down the hall and into the kitchen. I waited, expecting to hear the fax machine start dialing as usual, but instead, the footsteps paused and then moved toward me on the couch. I felt a surge of energy, and could sense something standing nearby, agitated. In my mind I heard a voice. Move! Groggy, I tried to shake off sleep, but then it repeated. Move! There was a sense of urgency, and I sat up, grabbing my shoes. This presence, which had always scared me, now seemed more frightened than I was. As I fumbled for my keys, the voice in my head grew desperate, pleading. Move, please go now! I bolted toward the kitchen, but as I reached the dining room, I realized what the ghost was afraid of. A deep, booming sound echoed from down the hall, each step heavier than the last. Something growled, and I heard doors slamming down the hallway, first the farthest bedroom, then the next room, then the bathroom. Only one door remained before it would reach the kitchen. Panicked, I yanked at the front door knob, but it wouldn't open. Though unlocked, it felt like something was holding it shut. The last door slammed, and I whispered a desperate prayer for help. Suddenly, the door flew open with such force that I fell backward into the wall, scrambling out onto the porch on my hands and knees. Behind me, the front door slammed shut so hard that the wood frame splintered in a section about 3 inches wide. I sat in my car until dawn. From that point on, I refused to go inside that house at night. I would only check it before dark, always bringing a friend along. My parents eventually downsized and sold the house to my sister, but I never went back after that night. Years later, I shared this story with a friend named Nick, who had spent time at my house in high school. His response was unforgettable. That poltergeist that hates blondes? It turns out Nick had felt it too. He explained that it had once trapped him in the kitchen, which explained why he suddenly stopped coming over. In my 20s, I worked for NASA Ames Research Center in Mountain View, California. You know, the place with those gigantic blimp hangars. It was a great job, but with a brutal commute, taking me nearly an hour to drive less than 25 miles. Being a workaholic, I usually left earlier than needed just to be on the safe side. One perk of the job was a canteen where I could sit down and have breakfast before the day got hectic, and it was cheap enough that I could enjoy it daily. One morning I overslept. I was supposed to leave by 5:45 a.m. to make it there by 7 o'clock, but it was already 6:45 by the time I woke up. My ancient alarm clock had finally died on me. I jumped up, threw on whatever clothes I could find, looking like I'd slept under a bus, and ran out the door. No breakfast today, and with my boss, whose name was ironically Wolf Kale, I knew I'd be in for a real scolding. Wolf had a reputation for cornering people at their desks and giving them an earful for a solid 5 minutes. At this rate, I'd be at least an hour and a half late. Anyone who knows Bay Area traffic understands the nightmare of Highway 101 heading north from San Jose, 8 lanes wide, bumper to bumper. To even get on the freeway, I had to wait at a metered ramp for 10 minutes just to merge from Cottle Road. I turned on my usual AM station, KGO, for traffic updates. They provided updates every 10 minutes, and in about 20 minutes of driving, I had barely covered 4 miles. After nearly 40 minutes of nail-biting tension, I finally reached the Logue Avenue exit. It's a tricky cloverleaf where I had to come off the freeway, cross 3 lanes, and quickly get into a turn lane with a protected arrow. I'd been listening to the time and traffic updates the whole way, anxiously aware of how late I was running. As I merged into the cloverleaf, I heard a distinct pop of air pressure, like the feeling you get when a storm rolls in. And then something strange happened. As I braced for the merge, I realized there was no traffic. Not a single car in sight. The air felt eerily still, and the sky seemed darker, like a storm might be brewing. The turn light went green, and I drove the next 6 blocks to NASA. It felt even darker, and the guard at the gate looked off. Something about him just wasn't right. He looked like he'd been plucked from 1950 and set down in the present day, subtly out of place. Used to seeing the same guard every day, I at least expected a nod, but this guy barely looked at me. The oddness hit me so hard that I kept my eye on him in the rearview mirror until he faded from sight, but he never moved or returned to his guard shack. As I pulled into the parking lot, my car radio suddenly went silent, and a strange sensation washed over me. It felt like the world had shifted, like the disorienting feeling you get when you're blindfolded and spun around. Everything looked subtly different, and the parking lot was completely empty. I sat there, mouth open, trying to figure out if I'd lost my mind. Then, abruptly, the radio blared back on, and the KGO announcer said, "Good morning, Bay Area. It's 6:29, and traffic is still light. We'll have updates in 1 minute, but first, here's our weather outlook." I quickly checked every station, and they all said the same time, 6:29. But my watch read 8:29. Where had those 2 hours gone? And did I really want to know? After all, NASA Ames would be a prime location to monitor humanity's technological progress if something was watching. The rest of the day passed as normal, but I never forgot that unsettling morning. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. When I was 12, my family and I often spent weekends hiking at Black Diamond Mines Park in Pittsburgh, California. The park, with its winding trails and rich history, held a special place in my heart. One of the places we always visited was Rose Hill Cemetery, perched up a winding dirt road within the park. Visiting this cemetery was a tradition. My father insisted we pay our respects there before exploring the trails. He's always been a firm believer in respect, both for the living and the dead, and anything less could earn you a firm reminder. One weekend, my younger brother and I ran ahead of everyone and reached the cemetery first. Forgetting everything we'd been taught, we tore through the headstones, laughing and jumping over graves without a thought. We ran around wildly until my brother suddenly stopped, saying, "I'm feeling weird. I'm going down to Mom and Dad." He seemed uneasy, but I shrugged it off and kept wandering. Soon, I began feeling an odd weight in the air myself, a heaviness I couldn't quite explain. The usual sounds of the park seemed to vanish. There were no birds chirping, no buzzing insects, just an eerie silence hanging over the cemetery. Even in full sunlight, I felt as if I were standing in shadow. Just as I was about to leave and go back to my family, I heard the light sound of a girl's giggle. I looked around, expecting to see another kid, but there was no one in sight. Then I heard it again, this time further off, toward the mountainside, away from the road and the gate where my family was. Curiosity got the best of me, and I followed the sound. Each giggle seemed to pull me further along, leading me toward the back gate of the cemetery. I didn't think twice about following it. In my mind, it was just another kid, and I was eager to find out what was so funny. But as I reached the back gate, someone grabbed my arm tightly, startling me. I looked up to see my father, flushed and out of breath. He'd run all the way to catch me, something I'd never seen him do before. Without a word, he pulled me into a tight hug, practically lifting me as he guided me out of the cemetery. My father, usually so calm and composed, looked genuinely shaken. When we reached the bottom of the hill, he asked me, his voice unsteady, what I thought I was doing following a white witch. Confused, I told him I hadn't seen any witch. I was just looking for the girl whose laughter I'd been hearing. My father's expression grew serious. He explained that he'd seen a figure, a woman made of floating white mist, leading me away. He was sure it wasn't a child, and he told me very firmly that whatever the spirit's intentions were, they were far from harmless. The next day, my father carved a simple wooden pendant from the heart of a redwood tree and had my uncle bless it. He told me to wear it every time we went up to the park. I never heard the girls giggle or saw the white witch again, but my oldest brother did, and whatever he saw left him so shaken that he eventually left the state to escape it. I still have that pendant. When I hold it, I feel the same sense of love and protection I felt in my father's arms that day. In moments like those, I realize just how lucky I am to have a father who understands the importance of respect, even for things beyond our understanding. Looking back, I know my behavior that day was disrespectful, something my father always taught us to avoid. I can't say I didn't know better, I just chose not to listen. And maybe, in some way, I got what I deserved. As with most life lessons, my father always seemed to know best. This encounter took place around 1982, and though it was decades ago, it remains one of my earliest and most memorable experiences with a spirit. Strangely, spirits have always appeared to me as regular people, so I'm not easily scared by them. This particular encounter happened under the North Pier of the Golden Gate Bridge, a place where you can feel the history in the air. There's a parking lot with a slope that leads down to the area beneath the North Tower, surrounded by massive granite blocks. These blocks, nearly 10 feet wide and 8 feet tall, were cut as support for the bridge during its construction and were never removed. It's a beautifully atmospheric spot, made even more haunting by the sound of the foghorn under the bridge's south tower. I was in my early 20s and dating a man who lived in San Francisco. Like a lot of young couples, we were broke, so after visiting Ghirardelli for some chocolate, we decided to walk to the area under the North Tower to watch the sunset. It was nearly dusk by the time we arrived, and we sat near the Fort Point Lighthouse, a small, decommissioned structure where you can watch the fog drift over the city and feel the salty breeze from the bay. We talked there until dark, wrapped in the romance of the scene until the chill set in, which often happens in San Francisco as the sun goes down. We only had light jackets, so we decided to head back to the car and warm up at a coffee shop on 18th Avenue. As we walked past the granite blocks, I noticed a man sitting on top of one of them, dressed in a red flannel shirt, wool pants, and work boots. He was smoking a pipe, and the glow from the pipe, along with the smell of tobacco, floated through the chilly air. I nodded and greeted him with a simple, "Hello?" since we were only about 5 feet from him. He replied, "Hello, fine evening, isn't it?" I noticed the parking lot was empty except for our car, so I asked if he needed a ride somewhere. He smiled and politely declined, saying he was waiting for his wife and daughter. Oddly, I asked if they were driving to meet him, and he laughed, saying, "No, I've been here quite a while, but I'll see them walk up." His answer left me slightly puzzled. At that moment, I noticed my date was fidgeting. Actually, he was practically hopping from one foot to the other like he was freezing. He tugged at my sleeve, then grabbed my elbow, pushing me toward the parking lot without saying a word. He was frantic, and I barely had a chance to say goodbye to the man on the granite block as I was ushered away. My date all but shoved me into the car, and as soon as we were in, he peeled out of the parking lot, looking shaken to his core. I turned to yell at him for his rude behavior, but as I saw his face, I stopped. He was pale, his eyes wide with fear, and for a second, it looked like he was about to cry. Once we'd crossed the bridge, he finally spoke, demanding, "Who were you talking to?" Confused, I said, "The man on the granite block." He told me he hadn't seen anyone there, nor heard anyone speak. All he could sense was the smell of pipe smoke, and he'd only seen me talking to what seemed to be a granite block. He said he felt a biting chill and was terrified something terrible was going to happen if we didn't leave immediately. His exact words were, "I was afraid we'd disappear." A little shaken myself, I started researching who the man could have been. The Golden Gate Bridge was completed in 1938, and several workers lost their lives during its construction. I believe he may have been one of those workers, somehow bound to the place. As for waiting on his wife and daughter, perhaps they lived in San Francisco and passed by often, with him waiting to cross over with them. After that night, I never saw my date again. I imagine he wanted to find a girlfriend who didn't talk to people who weren't there. I've had many encounters since then, but I'll never forget how calm and polite this spirit was. That night taught me that spirits, like people, aren't always out to scare us. They're just lingering in a place that holds meaning to them. Throughout my life, I've experienced a number of paranormal events, both big and small, but I rarely talk about them openly. It's not easy. People don't take the subject lightly, and some get quite upset. But if readers here are open to it, I'll share a few of these experiences. Be gentle. This is my first time putting them into words, and it makes me feel exposed. I considered starting from some of my earliest memories, when I was around 3, but I think it's better to begin with a later experience when I was more self-aware. 11 seemed like the right age, old enough to remember clearly, and yet young enough to be open to the unknown. I'd like to introduce you to my experience with Squid Jim. In 1974, my mother received a little white toy poodle as a birthday gift. She named him Squid Jim. Why that name, I still have no idea. Squid Jim was cute but highly strung and absolutely loyal to my mom. He had no patience for us kids though, and he didn't try to hide it. He was mean, snappy, growly, and had a habit of nipping at anyone who dared to get too close. I can honestly say I never did anything to deserve his aggression, but I can't speak for my 4 brothers. Whenever my mom caught one of them teasing Squid Jim, she'd take up the paddle. Squid Jim was her dog through and through. He loved to sit on the porch with her, watching the quiet neighborhood. It was the kind of peaceful, residential area with little traffic, where kids played freely and neighbors knew each other. Then, 5 years after she got Squid Jim, something happened that none of us could have expected. One day, my mom left him on the porch to fetch a Coke. She had just gotten back when she heard a loud pop, followed by a yelp. Rushing to the porch, she found Squid Jim bleeding and whimpering. My dad hurried him to the vet, but it was too late. Squid Jim had been shot with a BB gun and didn't survive. She spared me the details. I didn't learn until years later about the blood or how Squid Jim had tried to lick his wound. At the time, I only knew that Squid Jim was gone. About 2 weeks later, I was asleep in my room when a strange noise woke me up. It was a soft, repetitive sound, almost like whimpering and the gentle lapping of a dog licking its paws. Curious but not too concerned, I sat up in bed. I've always slept with a night light, not because I fear the dark itself, but because of the things I sometimes glimpse within it. Turning toward the sound, I saw something that froze me in place. There, on the floor, was Squid Jam. His white fur almost glowed in the dim light, and I could see a red stain spreading along his left side. Curled up in a cashew shape, he licked his side, a pool of red slowly forming beneath him. He looked real, solid, not like a shadow or a ghostly outline. I couldn't believe my eyes, and terror overwhelmed me. My body froze, and I couldn't scream or even breathe. The last thing I remember was the sound of my own shallow, whistling breaths as I fought against the paralyzing fear. After that, I don't know what happened. I may have fainted. The next morning, there was no trace of Squid Jam or any blood. I didn't tell my family what I'd seen. I forced myself to forget it, and the incident never happened again. 7 years later, during a family dinner, Squid Jam's name came up. We were sharing memories when my mom mentioned the details of his last moments, ones I hadn't heard before. She told us that Squid Jam had been shot on his left side, and that he hadn't died at the vet. He'd crawled back into the house and passed away in my room. My oldest brother added that he'd been the one to clean up the blood so I wouldn't see it and get scared. It was then that I finally told them about that night, the sounds, the sight of Squid Jam curled up on my floor, the red stain. My mom went pale and admitted that she, too, had heard strange sounds from my room after Squid Jam died, but she'd assumed she was just hearing things. After that, we let the topic go and continued with our game of hearts. But later that night, I went back to my old room and whispered a small prayer. I knew it was years too late, but I hoped somehow it might give him peace. This experience left a deep impression on me, and to this day, I wonder about the mysteries that linger between our world and whatever lies beyond. My grandma was born the youngest of 3 sisters in Maine, 1914. She used to tell me stories about her childhood, about the influenza that swept through, and she remembered wagons of bodies being taken away. She was only around 4 or 5 years old at the time. Her mother, my great-grandmother Hattie, had become so feverish that she'd run out into the snow, and one of Grandma's older sisters was so ill her hair fell out. It grew back wavy when she recovered. I used to think they must have had an angel watching over them. Those were turbulent times. World War I was in full swing, and my great-grandfather had what was called forgetfulness of old age, though he was only in his 50s. He couldn't join the military because of it. In the years that followed, after several miscarriages, Grandma and Grandpa finally had my mother on May 5, 1950. Grandpa had served in the Navy during World War II, and after the war, they'd moved from Maine to California, following some relatives, including my great-auntie June and Uncle Duke. Technically, June was my great-cousin, but I always called her auntie. Grandma was about 9 years old when June was born in 1923, and for a while, she thought she'd become a big sister instead of a young aunt. Growing up during the Great Depression, both Grandma and Auntie June worked hard from a young age. Grandma started working at a woolen mill and a shoe shop after school at just 9, while June took on jobs as she got older. Times were tough, and food was precious. For Grandma, her sister June was a blessing. The two stayed close their whole lives until Grandma passed in 2001. Grandma played a huge role in my life as well. I was born in 1970, and when my parents divorced when I was around 2, Grandma and Grandpa were there for me and my mom. We even lived with them for a while. She was a loving, open-hearted person who hated to see anyone go hungry or without shelter. As the years went on, both she and Grandpa became quite religious, finding peace in their faith. Auntie June and her husband Duke moved to California during World War II as well. June joined the Marines, and Duke joined the Army. After the war, they settled in California. Grandma and Grandpa preferred the peaceful countrysides of Northern California with its apple orchards and mountains, while June stayed closer to San Francisco, where she worked for Pan Am Airlines and Duke ran a hardware supply store. I grew up close to Grandma, always eager for the chance to stay with her. My childhood had its share of troubles, and life with her was a safe haven. My stepdad wasn't the best, so Grandma's home was a respite from the tension. I loved visiting her, especially when Auntie June would visit from the Bay Area. I'd listen in awe as they talked about growing up during tough times, surviving hardships, and supporting each other through it all. Then, last year, in March, I had a strange dream about Auntie June. In the dream, she was with Duke and Grandma in Grandma's old living room, talking and sitting together. I seemed to be observing it all from the side, not really part of the conversation. Then June got up and walked from the living room to the kitchen, and I followed. She sat down at the kitchen table, placed her hands flat on it, and spoke slowly. Very soon, I need to begin letting everyone know. It won't be long. I woke up wondering what the dream meant. Grandma and Duke had both passed years before, but Auntie June was still alive, though well into her 90s. I couldn't help but feel like this dream had some sort of message. The dream stayed with me, and later in March, I decided to call Auntie June to check on her. She sounded tired. "Oh, hon, I'm just so tired," she said. "I miss the key, and I miss Auntie Flo." I tried cheering her up, but she just told me how much she loved us all and how happy she was with her life, but that she was tired now. A few days later, my husband called her as well, but when he did, an ambulance was at her home. She'd fainted, and a care worker had called 911. When I finally spoke to her at the hospital, she confided in me that she was in the late stages of breast cancer, and it had spread to her lungs, throat, and stomach. She passed away just a week before my birthday, in April 2016. I couldn't help but wonder if that dream in Grandma's kitchen had been her way of preparing me for the inevitable. Strangely, while we were worried about Auntie June, we had no idea that my husband was battling his own unseen illness. By Christmas 2016, he was diagnosed with a large brain tumor. Looking back, it's chilling to think he already had it while June was so ill. I've had many dreams about death, often involving myself. When these dreams come, I've learned to say, "Well, Divine, if there's a reason for this, or if there's something I need to know, thank you for the heads up." But this dream about June felt more like a riddle than a warning. Even though I'd seen Grandma and Duke in the dream, it didn't feel frightening, more like a gentle message from beyond. Whenever I dream of loved ones who've passed, it feels like a gift, a chance to see them again. Grandpa passed when I was just 8, so when I dream of him, it feels like watching a movie of him moving, talking, and smiling. When I tell my husband about dreams of his late father, I share every detail I remember, the voice, the clothing, the expressions. In a way, it feels like a small hug from the eternal, and I'm grateful for every chance to see those I love, even in dreams. And now, June is at peace too, joining those who went before her. Melda once asked me if my brothers shared my sensitivity to the paranormal. I replied that my older brother, Kevin, had indeed had a few strange experiences of his own. Kevin lived a restless, nomadic life. It wasn't that he couldn't hold a job, he just had a severe case of wanderlust. When funds were low, or when he had no place to stay, he learned to make do. This story takes place during one of those times, and I'll try to recount it just as he told me, so I'll narrate it in his voice. Back in the early 70s, I found myself crashing wherever I could, beaches, flop houses, you name it. One of the stranger places I stayed in was a cave. I'd been moving around and stumbled upon this cave and thought, why not? It was actually pretty nice, as far as caves go. Not huge, but big enough. The main area, which I thought of as my living quarters, was about the size of a studio apartment, and toward the back, it branched off into a couple of tunnels. No smell of bats or animals either, so I figured it was safe enough. It became a reliable place to sleep or get out of the rain until something better came along. By day, I'd head down to the wharf, playing my flute for the tourists to earn a few coins. I'd spend it on food and a few other things I needed. On the way back, I'd gather firewood to get through the night. As evening fell, I'd build myself a small campfire, setting it up a little way back from the mouth of the cave. I'd have my dinner, read a bit, or just sit watching the flames until I felt sleepy. It wasn't a bad life. One day, I woke up to the sound of heavy rain, a real downpour. I couldn't see much beyond the mouth of the cave because the rain was coming down so hard. Sitting there dry and warm, I felt pretty lucky. A plastic trash bag wouldn't have done much to keep me comfortable in this storm. I stoked up the fire, feeling good about my little shelter. I always kept extra firewood, so I had enough to keep the fire going all day. My supplies were decent too. I still had most of a jar of peanut butter, some crackers, and a paperback novel I hadn't read yet. I figured I was set. I was halfway through my book when something caught my eye. There was movement near the mouth of the cave. I turned, not sure what to expect, and saw the form of a man standing at the entrance, his shape just barely visible in the dim, flickering firelight through the rain. I stood up, calling out, "Hello?" He didn't answer but held his hand out, palm up, then raised his other arm as if to show he was unarmed. It was odd, but I told him to come in before he got soaked. His steps were slow and hesitant, almost like he was wary of me. He was stooped over, too, looking old and worn. Trying to put him at ease, I smiled and invited him to sit by the fire. "Are you hungry?" I offered. PB on crackers wasn't fancy, but when you're hungry, it can feel like a feast. He just smiled and shook his head. That's when I noticed two strange things. First, he looked older than dirt and was absolutely filthy. Second, he was completely dry. Here he was, coming in from a rainstorm, and yet he was bone dry. My mind reeled at that. Rain makes things wet, plain and simple, yet this guy was untouched. I tried asking a few questions, what he was doing out in the storm, whether he'd gotten lost. He just kept shaking his head, not saying anything. Maybe he's mute, I thought, but as soon as the thought crossed my mind, he spoke up. "No, Sonny. I can talk. I was just trying to figure you out. But I guess you're all right. You ain't no claim jumper, are you?" I laughed. "Nope, not a claim jumper here. Didn't know this was a mine either." "It is and it isn't," he replied. "It was natural when I found it, but you've seen those tunnels, right? I dug them myself, mostly by hand." My first thought was, great, I just invited a lunatic to share my fire. But then I realized, how did he know about those tunnels? Maybe he's been here before. He looked at me, and somehow, I felt like he knew what I was thinking. He spoke again. "Nope, not crazy. And yes, I was here long before you. Told ya, it's my claim." I froze. I hadn't said anything out loud, yet he'd answered my thoughts directly. Just then, a loud clap of thunder echoed through the cave, and instinctively, I turned to look at the mouth of the cave as a flash of lightning lit up the outside. I must have jumped a foot when the thunder cracked. Laughing nervously at myself, I turned back toward the old man, but he was gone. For a second, I just stared, not sure what I was seeing. There was no way an old man like him could have gotten out of there so fast, not without passing me, and there was no other way out but through the tunnels. I called out, "Hello?" But there was no answer. The only sound was the crackling of the fire, and the steady beat of the rain outside. That night, I didn't get much sleep, and the memory of that encounter has stuck with me ever since. This story took place over the summer of 2007 in El Sobrante, California. Up until that summer, I'd always believed that people were solely responsible for their actions, and that any talk of paranormal phenomena was just Hollywood's way of adding thrills. But that summer changed everything. Anger had always felt alien to me. I found the sensation draining and went out of my way to avoid conflict, preferring to let things go than engage in heated emotions. This approach often had my family calling me a pushover, but I didn't mind. As the quietest, most introverted member of the family, I was happy to keep to myself. We lived at the end of a cul-de-sac in a comfortable 2-story house. My bedroom was upstairs, with my younger brother's room next door and my mother's room across the hall. Our summer had been wonderfully calm. We'd spent most days by the pool or making fresh pico de gallo. There was no tension in the family or even in the neighborhood, just the relaxed, sunny days of a typical California summer. That's why it was such a shock when, one night, I woke up feeling unusually agitated. My skin crawled, and I felt a tightness in my throat, a strange sensation of unease and restlessness. It was completely out of the blue. After some journaling and a cup of chamomile tea, I managed to calm myself down enough to drift off to sleep around 4:30 a.m. My dreams, if I had any, left no trace. But for the next several nights, I woke up at precisely 3 a.m., and each time, I was angry. This wasn't just an irritation or a passing frustration. It was a deep, intense fury that surged through me. The feeling grew with each night, and I never dreamed. I'd wake up clenched with tension, my entire body alert, almost as if in a state of fight or flight. By the fifth night, paranoia had crept in. I rationalized that I wasn't in any real danger, but an inner voice whispered, "Something is going to hurt you. You must hurt it before it hurts you. You must hurt it badly." This thought looped endlessly in my mind, drowning out all reason. I'd get up and check the locks on every door and window, pacing the house as my dread only grew stronger. On the eighth night, I finally snapped. I bolted upright in bed, overcome by a rage so intense that I began pounding my fists into my pillow repeatedly. My rational mind was gone, overtaken by a feverish anger. I felt wrong, insulted beyond measure, though I couldn't explain why. Someone, or something, was going to pay. I was on the verge of tearing up old journals and ripping my bedding to shreds when, suddenly, I froze. The air around me had turned frigid. On a clear summer night in the East Bay, such a chill was completely unnatural. The cold was bone deep, and I could see my breath clouding in the dark. That icy draft shocked me out of my fury. I scrambled to check the thermostat, but it was off. I peeked into my brother's room and then into my mom's room. Everyone was sound asleep. When I went downstairs, I found the source of the draft. To my horror, the front door was wide open, swinging slightly onto the street. Every single window in the house was open as far as it could go. Even the sliding glass door to the patio stood wide open, leaving the entire first floor exposed. Panicking, I ran through the house, shutting and locking everything, before waking my mom and brothers. "We've been robbed!" I shouted. They got up, as alarmed as I was, and we called the police. But after filing the report, we realized that nothing was missing. There was no sign of forced entry. It was as though someone, or something, had simply opened all the doors and windows, leaving the house vulnerable, but untouched. The whole experience left us shaken, but what hurt most was when my mother pulled me aside afterward and asked, "Are you experimenting with drugs?" Her face was full of worry. "You've been acting so strange lately, like you're angrier every day. It's like you're not yourself. Talk to me." Her words stung, and I was surprised to hear her say that. I had always avoided anger. I wasn't an angry person. I confided in her, telling her about waking up at 3 a.m. every night, overwhelmed by this unprovoked rage. She listened quietly, and in the days that followed, my anger started to fade. I still didn't sleep well, but little by little, the irrational fury subsided, and the strange 3 a.m. awakenings stopped. As usual, my sleep remained dreamless. 2 weeks later, our neighborhood was rocked by the sound of gunshots just beyond our cul-de-sac. Police cars and ambulances flooded the quiet streets. A man, not much older than me, had used his father's handgun to attack his family, shooting his parents and 2 of his siblings as they watched reruns of their favorite football games. Only 2 siblings survived. I later spoke with one of the surviving siblings, a girl I knew from school. When I asked her if she noticed anything strange before the incident, she looked away for a moment before answering. "My brother was different," she said softly. "He was always so loving and easygoing, but in the weeks before, he'd wake up from naps or from sleep just furious. He started pinching us, then slapping us, and finally, he'd come in and punch us as we brushed our teeth. It was like he was someone else." I hesitated but asked if their family had experienced a break-in. Her eyes flickered briefly, and she nodded. "One morning, every window and door was wide open, but nothing was missing. I remember it was freezing cold in the house, even though it was the middle of summer." Reflecting on this experience, I still wonder, Are there forces that can drive us to become the very worst versions of ourselves? That summer, I glimpsed something dark and unexplainable. It was a reminder that some questions have no answers and that sometimes the line between ourselves and something else might be thinner than we think. Back in 2007, my fiancé, now husband, and I were living in a small town north of the Bay Area, California. We were at a transitional point, having just finished college, unsure of our next steps but in the midst of planning our wedding. Afterward, we'd find a more permanent home, but for the moment, my father offered us a place to stay in one of his condominium complexes. He's a real estate developer, and while we still had to pay rent, it was cheaper than what we'd been paying. The condo felt strange from the start. The layout was odd, and neither of us really liked it. You enter through a tiny foyer on the ground floor, with a staircase leading directly to the second floor. At the top was a bathroom with frosted glass in the door, opening up into the kitchen and family room. A second staircase led to the third floor, which had the master bedroom, a spare room, and a bathroom with the washer and dryer. Despite the windows, it was a dark, middle-unit condo with limited natural light. The minute we stepped inside, we felt off. But this was our only option unless we wanted to move in with one of our parents, so we tried to brush it off as just being an unfamiliar layout. At the time, we had 3 cats, all social and relaxed in our previous apartment. But here, they acted strangely. One of them hid the entire time we lived there and rarely came out. The place always felt dark, no matter how much light we tried to let in, and it wasn't long before my fiancé and I began fighting frequently. We'd been together for 3 years without much conflict, but now we were at each other's throats constantly. I was looking for a job, he was commuting to a larger city, and we were planning our wedding, a stressful time, sure, but the condo seemed to amplify every bit of tension between us. We didn't initially talk about our discomfort. My husband is a rational, level-headed person who rarely gets rattled and didn't want to alarm me. He knew I was sensitive to strange experiences, especially after a difficult childhood home. But as time went on, neither of us could ignore the strange energy in the condo. It began with the feeling of being watched. No matter where we were, we felt like we were never truly alone. Then things took a darker turn. My usually mild temperament shifted. I became severely depressed, with thoughts so dark that my fiancé was terrified of leaving me alone. He worried he'd come home to find something terrible had happened to me. It didn't make sense. I had every reason to be happy, but I felt as if something was pulling me down, draining the light out of me. Then things became undeniably strange. One night, we were sitting on the couch playing fetch with one of our cats. This cat was more dog-like than feline. She loved playing fetch and would retrieve her toy tirelessly in our previous apartment. I tossed her toy halfway up the stairs to the 3rd floor, and she started to chase after it. But as she reached the 3rd step, she froze. Her fur stood on end, and she stared up at the ceiling, backing down slowly and abandoning her toy. My husband and I exchanged a worried look. Something was clearly wrong. After that, she wouldn't go upstairs unless one of us was with her, and even then, she'd stare at the ceiling as if watching something invisible. Among the rooms, the 3rd floor felt the worst, with an unsettling presence we couldn't shake. When I took a shower, I felt as if I were being watched. Whenever we were on one floor, we'd hear noises coming from another. And even when I was alone, it felt like someone was just out of sight. The only time I caught a glimpse of this presence was in the 2nd floor bathroom. I'd closed the door, and through the frosted glass, I saw the silhouette of someone walking past. I was alone in the condo. My heart raced as I searched every room, finding no one. After that, the sense of being watched grew worse. Our cat's fear of the stairs, our endless arguments, and my worsening depression were all building up into something dark and oppressive. Then, one morning, after my husband had left for work, I was startled awake by the bed shaking. It felt like the fast-paced jostling of a pet scratching itself, so I reached down to nudge the cat, only to find nothing there. The bed stopped shaking, and I figured maybe one of the cats had jumped off. I went back to sleep. The next morning, The bed shook again after my husband left, but this time there was no mistaking it. It was like someone was deliberately kicking the mattress. When I looked, there was no one. Still, I tried to rationalize it as a minor earthquake. But on the third morning, the shaking was so intense that I ran down the stairs in terror. I called my husband, telling him what was happening. Oddly, this never happened when he was home. He believed me but didn't know what to do beyond offering comfort. My depression morphed into sheer terror. I wouldn't go upstairs alone, and even with my husband home, I started sleeping with the lights on. Finally, we moved our bed to the spare room, hoping it would help, but my fear followed me. The bed didn't shake there, but I could still feel something lurking, circling us, watching. Desperate, we tried saging the condo. Things calmed down slightly, but the fear never entirely left. One afternoon, exhausted from sleepless nights, I laid down on the couch and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. My husband calls it death sleep, when you're so far under you're beyond regular sleep. But this time, I felt as if I'd woken up. I sat up on the couch and looked at the staircase, where a young man stood halfway up, frozen in place. He looked to be in his late teens or early 20s, with jeans, a plaid shirt, and brown hair. We stared at each other, my body frozen in fear. Then, the room fell away, and I was standing in a forest, watching this young man in the same plaid shirt throw a noose over a tree branch and hang himself. The tree was exactly where the staircase now stood. I screamed and snapped awake. Everything clicked into place. The depression, the cat's fear, the sensation of being watched. I couldn't find any record of his death, but I called my father, asking if he knew what had been on the property before the condos were built. "Oh, it was all forest," he said casually, "with a stream running through. We diverted the stream, cut down the trees, and put in the condos." A few months later, we finally moved out. Our time in that condo was only 11 months, but it felt much longer. On our last day there, we packed up everything except our computer. My husband leaned over the desk, reading something on the screen, when the desk shook violently beneath us. I looked at him, wide-eyed. "Did you feel that?" He nodded, equally shaken. It was exactly the same sensation that had haunted me in our bed. I like to think it was the young man's final goodbye. We packed up and moved far from California and my father's condo complex, grateful to leave that dark chapter behind us. This story isn't fiction. I wish it were. Living through it was terrifying. I grew up in the Bay Area, California, in a house my father built from the ground up. No previous owners, just us, and the oppressive energy that seemed to permeate the entire place. My father isn't a good man. His anger and cruelty ran deep, and I believe much of that negativity seeped into the house as he built it. From a young age, I sensed spirits around me, and I wasn't alone. My mother, sister, brother, and I all have abilities, but it was an unspoken truth among us back then. None of us talked about the strange things that happened until much later. My father, the one exception, denies ever experiencing anything. Our home was turbulent and toxic. There was mental, emotional, and even physical abuse. I believe this atmosphere was a breeding ground for something dark. This isn't a story about one incident but rather a series of experiences that shaped my childhood. When I was a baby, I shared a room with my sister, who is 6 years older than me. She once told me that when I was in my crib, she'd see terrifying faces floating above me. It frightened her so much that she'd pull me into her bed to keep me safe. As we grew older, strange occurrences became routine. Voices called our names, but they were always the voices of family members. I'd come home from school, hear my mother call my name from the front door, and answer back, only to find I was alone. This happened to all of us, and it was always a family member's voice, usually my mom's or one of my siblings. Strangely, none of us ever heard our father's voice being mimicked. Each of us felt the sensation of someone watching us, of shadows darting just out of sight. Our cats would suddenly fixate on a spot, fur puffed up, growling at what seemed to be nothing. We'd feel tugs on our clothes or light taps on our shoulders, only to turn around and find no one there. Things would go missing, only to reappear in unusual places. At the time, we'd accuse each other of moving our belongings, but as we got older, we realized that wasn't the case. As teenagers, the activity grew darker. We started seeing a form, a dense, smoky, black shape that wasn't quite see-through. It wasn't limited to one room. This thing had a specific path it followed. Our house had a long, dark hallway lined with bedrooms on one side, much like the hallway from Poltergeist. My room was at the start of the hall, followed by the bathroom, my sister's room, an office, and finally, my brother's room at the end, which created an L shape. This entity would begin in the corner of my room, travel along the walls, and pass through to the next room, terrorizing us one by one. Each of us felt it looming over us at random times, filling us with dread. It was an overwhelming, suffocating presence. I never slept well in that house, and to this day, I still have trouble sleeping. I would keep a knife under my pillow, thinking it might protect me from something I couldn't see. Every night was filled with restless sleep, and more than once, I'd wake to find my drawers and closet doors wide open, even though I knew I hadn't opened them. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe it was a prank, but deep down, I knew something else was at play. And it wasn't just me, the entities seemed to take turns harassing each of us. My sister, who also slept with a nightlight, had terrifying encounters as well. Sometimes, she'd feel something tugging at her feet, like it was trying to pull her off the bed. Other nights, she'd wake up feeling as if she were being strangled, gasping for breath. She once heard heavy breathing outside her window, even though it was closed, and when she realized the sound might be coming from inside her room, she ran screaming down the hall. My father dismissed it as a wild animal, and to appease us, he installed a motion sensor light outside her window. While she never heard the breathing again, we started hearing scratching sounds and footsteps on the roof, even though there was no attic. Every time we'd run outside to check, there'd be nothing there. Things started to make sense when we finally shared our experiences with each other. My sister, after studying abroad and realizing that she hadn't experienced any of this elsewhere, came back convinced it was the house itself. She hadn't wanted to scare us, so she'd kept her suspicions to herself, but as we pieced things together, we began to see a bigger picture. For me, the last straw came when I was 17. I woke up one night to a crushing weight on my chest. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I felt something pinning my arms, pressing down on me with hot breath near my face. My mind raced, and finally, I shouted in my head, "Get off me!" The weight receded down my legs in a cold rush, and I leapt out of bed, screaming down the hallway to get my mom. My brother tried to reassure me it was just sleep paralysis, but when I saw the bruises on my arms, I knew it was something more. After that, I started sleeping on the couch in the family room. My sister soon joined me, sleeping on the other couch. The activity was less intense outside of our bedrooms, so the family room became our sanctuary. We were nearly adults, but neither of us could sleep alone in our rooms. Other people who stayed with us had similar experiences. My brother's friend, who sometimes stayed over, said he'd feel as if he were being strangled when he slept in my sister's room. My cousin, who visited frequently on business, felt as though someone was climbing into bed with him. My grandmother, recovering from surgery, refused to sleep in my room after just one night, claiming she saw faces in the corners, twisted and malicious. The most direct encounter came from my brother. He woke one night to a man's voice saying, "Wake up, Tim." Annoyed, he sat up, expecting to find someone in his room, only to see a man standing by his dresser, dressed in white with a cane and bowler hat. My brother, never one to back down, angrily asked, "What the **CK do you want?" The figure vanished instantly, leaving him shaken. Over time, we all moved out. The house became less active with just my parents living there, and when they divorced, my father remained alone in the house. Years later, my mother and my nephew were visiting, and my nephew, who was only 4, came to her early in the morning, insisting she leave her room. When she asked why, he simply pointed to the corner and said, "There's a something." My mom got up without question and took him out of the room. Even after leaving the house, the memories haunted us. Each of us had nightmares about the house, as though its shadow followed us. 6 years ago, I was in the throes of another bout of sleepless nights when my sister emailed, saying she'd seen it again, the entity hovering over her in her sleep. My brother shared that he, too, was experiencing disturbances in his home, despite having moved abroad. We realized the connection. Each of us still had items from that house, a chair, a few pieces of furniture that had belonged there. We gathered these things, got rid of them, and finally, together, we took back the energy it had sapped from us over the years. We meditated, envisioning ourselves standing strong and reclaiming our power, shrinking the entity until it faded away. Since that day, none of us have felt its presence. It's been over 15 years since I've set foot in that house, and I have no plans to return. My father still lives there, alone. Whether it's gone for good or remains, I don't know. I only know that, together, my siblings and I managed to close a dark chapter in our lives. Each of us has since experienced paranormal events in other places, perhaps because of our sensitivity. But that house remains the most terrifying experience of my life. My husband has American roots, and in 2013, we stayed with some of his friends in Los Angeles. Though I'd known these friends socially since 2009, this was my first time in their home. My husband, on the other hand, had visited them many times and had never experienced anything unusual. Their home was a modern, open-plan design with tall floor-to-ceiling windows, beautiful to some but not exactly to my taste. However, the garden was another story entirely. It was lush and established, with rock gardens winding between plants, creepers covering the fences, and several large trees both in the front and back. It had a tranquil, almost enchanted feel to it. We arrived in the late afternoon after spending the day with other friends, and by the time we got to their place, they were already hosting a barbecue. There were around 10 people there, and we spent most of the day and evening outside in the backyard, enjoying the company and atmosphere. Around 11 p.m., I was worn out and decided to call it a night. I said goodnight to everyone and went inside to prepare for bed. After my usual nighttime routine, I realized the bed hadn't been made, no sheets, just a throw blanket. Not knowing where they kept the linens and not wanting to interrupt the gathering, I shrugged it off, kicked off my shoes, and laid down on the couch for a nap. When I woke up, the house was quiet, the lights were off, and the party had clearly ended. I found one of their cats curled up on my feet, and someone had kindly covered me with the throw blanket. I felt like someone who'd passed out after a night of drinking, which amused me since I don't drink at all. The exact time was a mystery, but it was clear everyone had gone to bed. The couch I'd slept on faced a large front window with a view of the balcony and front garden. The guest room was just next to the couch, and I could see that my husband was sound asleep inside. The night outside looked peaceful, so I decided to step out onto the balcony for a moment before heading to bed. A streetlight nearby illuminated the front yard, casting a soft glow over the plants and trees. The house was still well lit from outside, so I didn't turn any lights on. I went to the bathroom first, then quietly slipped out through the sliding glass door to the balcony. Standing there, I looked down at the rock garden and admired the climbing, morning glory, creeper on the fence, a name that, to me, was humorously suggestive. The garden's plants and trees, especially the tall gum tree by the fence and the large jacaranda tree nearby, reminded me of home, and I thought to myself, this garden could almost be in Australia. As I took in the scene, something extraordinary happened. The jacaranda tree beside the balcony seemed to reach toward me. One or two of its thick branches lowered, brushing the backs of my shoulders as if they were gently tapping me. I was transfixed, feeling an overwhelming sense of calm and, oddly, the urge to cry, though it wasn't out of fear. The sensation was powerful but gentle, like a quiet acknowledgement. I instinctively looked up at the tree's branches and half whispered, "Hi," feeling an almost inexplicable connection. I'm not sure how long the moment lasted, maybe 20 seconds, maybe longer. Eventually, The branch or branches lifted back to their original position, moving as smoothly as they had when they lowered. There was no sudden snap or recoil as you'd expect from a branch releasing tension. Instead, they returned to their natural state with calm deliberation. I stayed there, still calm and now with a strange sense of gratitude, as if the tree had imparted a "thank you," or "I see you." That moment felt profound. I've had a deep frustration for years about the rapid gentrification and destruction of nature, and I'd become a quiet activist. I don't attend protests, but I research environmental laws and take legal action when I can. It's slow work, but it's my way of defending what's being lost. I hadn't spoken a word of this passion that day, but somehow, I felt the tree knew. It was a validation, a reminder of my place in the world. Returning inside, I felt lighter. I went to bed but lay there, watching the jacaranda outside the window, replaying the experience in my mind. The branches were a good couple of feet higher than where I'd been standing. I couldn't rationalize it. The branches were thick, and there were no fallen limbs or signs of animals that could have weighed them down. Yet the way the branch had bent was so deliberate, like the swooping trunk of a palm tree at the arboretum. The next morning, I considered possible explanations. An animal, maybe, but it would have to be extremely heavy, a branch shedding, but there were no signs of fallen limbs. The experience didn't feel like a hallucination or dream. It felt deeply real and natural, as if the tree had reached out from a different rhythm of time, its own awareness touching mine. When I told my husband the next evening, he listened intently, and although he had no explanation, he didn't dismiss it. We'd never heard of trees moving this way, but a few years later, I read about someone else's experience with a tree reaching out, and it stunned me. The only difference was that they had seen a face in the tree, whereas I had not. I like to think that trees have some mysterious ability to communicate in ways we don't yet understand. They're remarkable beings with histories shaped by the natural world around them, perhaps able to tap into consciousnesses near them. I don't believe they need to be humanoid to be aware or significant. They're trees, and they're magnificent in their own right. And maybe every so often, they can bend the rules of nature to connect with us, just as that jacaranda did with me.